Now, this doesn't normally happen, and I think it's a sign that the momentum is not on the Republican side. Again, this is not a secret, and it's why Trump is so desperate to gerrymander and basically cheat his way to a midterm victory. I'm not so sure that's going to play out as well as Trump and his supporters believe. I think there's going to be quite a bit of pushback, and I think we're seeing a very optimistic view for the Democrats. All right, another reason for optimism is that Trump is absolutely terrible at governing. Now, he's pretty darn effective at the authoritarianism stuff. He's been remarkably effective at intimidating the media, law firms, colleges and universities. He's fired countless scientists and experts. He's eliminated entire government organization that he disagrees with. He's consolidated power. He is extraordinarily gifted at destroying things, terrifying people, and increasing his own power. But, and this is so important, that's not good governance. In the 2024 presidential election, a majority of voters were willing to overlook Trump's significant flaws because they believed that Trump would be an effective president or CEO of the country, that the economy would get better, inflation would go down, their lives would improve. That hasn't happened. And there's no sign that it will. Trump is proving wildly inept at solving the real-world problems Americans face. Against the advice of nearly every economist, he's put tariffs up that will most certainly hurt the economy and increase inflation. The American consumer is facing an average of effective tariff rate of 18.3%. That's the highest rate since 1934. Consumer spending is down. More than half Americans say that the cost of groceries is a major source of stress in their life right now. Do these sound like policies that are going to inspire voters to show up at the midterms and reward the president for a job well done? I don't think so. Let's also think about the organizations that Trump has destroyed and all the experts and professionals and civil servants he's fired. Despite what Trump and RFK say, those individuals provide meaningful service and expertise to the country. They are invaluable. At some point, their absence will be felt. The chickens will come home to roost. Whether it's a public health crisis, a natural disaster, an economic downturn, a national security crisis, or maybe it's just a shortage of labor because they have deported millions of individuals who we have now realized are vital to our economic well-being. Big picture, Trump's government will be exposed as unable to solve the problems he was elected to address. Surrounding yourself with loyalists is a way of getting total obedience, but it's not a smart way to govern and solve real-world problems. And I believe ultimately the people will hold him accountable. Over time, Trump's ineptitude will be exposed. The toxic impression of Trump, which is already starting to form, is only going to get worse. And so I believe it's only a matter of time before more and more people turn against him. Now, Trump still remains the greatest threat to our democracy since the Civil War, but his total incompetence and ineptitude at governing creates space for righting the ship. We've learned that Americans will tolerate a lot of things, but I don't think incompetence is one of them. There's a reckoning that's coming. So it's hard to see, and it can really feel lonely out there. And Donald Trump is going to do everything he can to try to stop it. But I really believe, despite all the ugliness that is the American political system right now, I believe there's some room for optimism. All right, we've got to take a break, and then we're going to be right back here with an interview with Thomas Countryman on WCPT.
Choose Views with Richard Chew.
Can we fix our democracy? Absolutely. We have to. We have no choice. Has it been a democracy that's had major flaws and holes in it like Swiss cheese? Absolutely. And do our systems fail us? Yes, they do. It starts with this, guys. Trust me when I say this. It starts with acknowledging that we have these issues and we have these problems.
Richard Chew. Weekday mornings at 6 on WCPT 820.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-708-3091. 800-708-3091. 800-708-3091. That's 800-708-3091.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. We are thrilled to be joined by our next guest, Thomas Countryman. Mr. Countryman has had a long and distinguished diplomatic career that includes 36 years as a member of the U.S. Foreign Service. This culminated in service as Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Nonproliferation and Acting Undersecretary for Arms Control. He served at U.S. embassies in Belgrade, Cairo, Athens, and Rome. From 1994 to 1997, he was responsible for advising Ambassador Albright on Middle East affairs at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us on WCPT.
Thank you, Professor Muck. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm so excited for this conversation. And I'd like to begin with a recent New York Times article you were quoted in exploring the relationship between authoritarians and science. The big takeaway being that authoritarians have always feared and attempted to suppress science. You made clear that we need to understand there's a pattern at play, that we have seen this authoritarian playbook before. Specifically, you were quoted as saying, quote, Trump did not invent this playbook, and that the success of an authoritarian depends on the squelching of all independent centers of thought, and that includes universities, law firms, and scientists. Can you walk us through your thinking on this, the idea of an authoritarian playbook and why it's important for authoritarians to curb independent centers of thought?
Sure. The authoritarian playbook has developed over decades, from the 1920s in Italy, the 1930s in Germany, through the Soviet Union, through China, up until modern-day regimes in Russia or Hungary, and it's had several similar elements in each case. First, you need to dominate a legislature that will rubber stamp all the decisions of the boss. Second, you need to either control the courts or be ready to ignore them. Third, you have to control who votes and, more importantly, who counts the votes. Fourth, you need to have a national police state that is totally obedient, a national police force totally obedient to the supreme leader. Fifth, you need to create an enemy class, whether you define your enemies in ethnic or religious or social terms, somebody who can be the target of government power. And six, you need to build a personality cult around a supreme leader who is not only a strong man, but virtually infallible. And there's a seventh element that we'll talk about here in particular, which is to control the way people think and to make them incapable of thoughts that resist the leader. Now, all of these elements have been adopted by different leaders with different emphasis and have used the kind of language and emotional appeal that will get them where they want to be. And in each case, we have seen a democratic society turn into an authoritarian state through the steps that are outlined in this authoritarian playbook. And clearly, few have done it better than Mr. Trump and the fascist-leaning brain trust at the Heritage Foundation.
I think that's such an important point. As as a social scientist, as you were walking through those points, it's sort of fascinating to think about history. But as an American citizen, it's kind of terrifying to think about how well he fits that pattern. Talk to me about the implications of this shift, and specifically thinking about science. Science has always been at the center of the United States' economic and technological success. It's an essential part of our global strength. What do you see as the fallout from moving away from that and having a much more fascist understanding of the role of science?
Well, first, let me put the attack on science in a broader context and then talk specifically about your question. What are the practical implications? it is important for an authoritarian leader to gain control of, if you like, the intellectual levers of the society. That means several things. It means rewriting history to accord with your particular view of the world. It means suppressing free media. It means dumbing down the population, lowering the quality of education at both the elementary and the university level. It means attacking artists, and it also means attacking science. And the cumulative effect of all of these is well captured in Orwell's 1984 novel, where he says the motto of the state is ignorance is strength. That's what Mr. Trump seeks to do, whether it's an attack on scientists, science foundations in or out of the government, universities, law firms, media, is to suppress, to eliminate or intimidate every center of independent thought that could challenge him on any of his statements or policies. So the attack on science is part of that. And so let's think through what are the practical implications for Americans of this rejection of science. First, it has an effect on people's everyday lives. If all of the meteorologists are fired from the National Weather Service and we are less able to predict hurricanes and flooding, well, we saw in Texas exactly what happens to ordinary people. If there is another pandemic of the type such as COVID-19, well, the president and his really low intelligence Secretary of Health, RFK Jr., have eliminated funding to develop the next vaccine and to keep warm the laboratories you need to respond to the next pandemic. Remember, just a couple of years ago, Trump said one of the biggest accomplishments of his first term was rapid development of a COVID-19 vaccine. Now, his appointed stooge is eliminating the capability to do exactly that again for the next pandemic. Take another practical consideration. If the Food and Drug Administration is unable to control the quality of food, we could easily have foodborne illnesses that are rampant in the United States. The list goes on and on of the practical effects on everyday Americans. But then there's also the effect that it has on our economy, on our national strength, whether military or economic, and on our reputation in the world. What will happen is that good scientists, good American citizens who will prefer to live in a place where intelligence is rated as a virtue instead of a handicap, and to do their scientific work in other countries. Keep in mind that the United States has produced more Nobel laureates in science than any other country,
right,
in great part because of the free atmosphere of research we have traditionally enjoyed, as well as government support for basic research. That advantage shifts automatically to other countries. Some of them will be friendly countries, Canada, France, many European countries that are already actively recruiting the best American scientific minds. Many more will also go to China. And many of those who used to be coming to the United States to do research to contribute to our economy will be going to China or other countries. The U.S. will experience the same kind of brain drain that Russia and Hungary and other places have experienced for the last several years. So this is going to be something that sets us back. It is something that causes other governments that are seriously interested in economic strength to salivate at the opportunity to get the best American minds. And it's something that makes people in China simply laugh at the stupidity of the self-destruction of the U.S. system.
That's such a really important point. And as you were talking, I had written the word brain drain down, right? Because you're absolutely right. What's happening for so many years, other countries complained about the United States stealing the best and the brightest. And now we may see a flip of that, where some of the best and most engaging and most thoughtful scientists are going to India, they're going to China, they're going anywhere but the United States. You were talking about that Trump didn't invent this playbook. And in our correspondence over email, you were talking a little bit about other ambassadors around the world. When you look around the world, what do you see other leaders? I mean, do you see other leaders deploying similar tactics? I mean, is the ambassador corps, are they seeing this dynamic play out as well?
Yes, and of course, it's retired ambassadors who now have the freedom to speak out about what they've witnessed around the world. Anyone who is brave enough to stay in the State Department after the Trump administration has decimated the place is intimidated from saying anything. Yeah. Not just from saying anything critical of Trump, from saying anything at all until they know it accords with what the supreme leader believes. So this group of friends of mine who are retired ambassadors talked at a recent event about what they had seen firsthand in countries that were young or growing democracies, and saw how they turned to authoritarian states. We're talking about Russia, Hungary, Nicaragua, the Philippines, Zimbabwe, the country I know best, which is Serbia. And in each case, almost all the elements of this authoritarian playbook were used in order to create domination by one man, one party. The United States is not immune from the same kind of tactics. We can call ourselves special. We should be proud of our history. We should be proud of how well our government of checks and balances functioned for almost more than 200 years. But we should never consider that what happened in Russia or the Philippines or Nicaragua cannot happen here.
Can you, sort of picking up on that thought, can you speak a little more about the challenges of trying to reverse course once a state has started down the authoritarian path? You were talking about Serbia, but there's a multitude of those sort of early emerging democracies who are now trying to stop that. So what's difficult, or how, once that process has started?
Yeah, well, there's bad news and there's good news there.
Okay.
The bad news is it's difficult, because there is no such thing as a democracy that elected a person who the next day, his first day in office, he said, now I am the dictator, now I am the supreme law. It is a gradual process. It has been less gradual under the Trump regime than it has been in other countries. But each individual step, if a citizen says, that doesn't really affect me, so I'm not going to speak up, it is a series of compromises that people are willing to make. You can see it right now in the debate among universities, as Trump goes after universities, because universities in every country are centers of independent thought and protest and dissent. But in the United States, there's a number of universities that have stood up and said, we will defend our academic freedom. And there are some who shamefully have said, we're willing to make compromises with illegal and unreasonable demands. So that's the bad news. This can decay little by little. I still take inspiration not only from the remaining checks and balances that we have, from those political leaders who are willing to speak out, from judges who are still willing to make decisions according to the law instead of according to dictate, and from individual citizens who get out and carry a sign and organize and register people to vote. We have that capability for resistance. I see also in the history, I mean, I remember visiting Czechoslovakia in 1986 in very dark days of communist suppression there, and meeting with dissidents who simply would not give up. They knew that their struggle may take many years, but they would not give up. I get inspiration from Serbia, where we have seen hundreds of thousands of students turn out against a regime that is both anti-democratic and hopelessly corrupt. So it can be done, but the sooner you begin to recognize what is happening to us, the sooner you begin to resist, the sooner we can get back to the kind of freedom and democracy that Americans have traditionally enjoyed.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Czechoslovakia toward the end of the Cold War, of Václav Havel. I mean, it's such a wonderful and inspiring case of people and ideas and the agency to be able to change the world. I think that's an important message, right? We shouldn't be running away from the darkness of today, but also acknowledge that you're right. There is a possibility of things getting better. So, all right, the other issue I'm eager to...
I'll just mention that's the common element in authoritarian states, is to seek to convince citizens that they are not citizens, they are subjects. They do not have agency. They do not have the power, either as individuals or as groups, to resist the state. And that is very much what the Trump and Heritage Foundation authoritarian playbook is all about.
That's an important point, yeah. Okay, so the other issue I want to hear your thoughts on is the dramatic shift we're witnessing in the international system. This week marked the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and it feels as though the consensus underlying that post-war order is unraveling, much of which is being led by the United States itself. The U.S. appears to be upending the very global system it has spent decades building, casting doubt on a bipartisan foreign policy consensus on global trade and international security that has guided the country for decades. So I'm curious to hear your reaction as you look out at the world and watch this unraveling. What are you thinking?
Well, of course, I'm disgusted that America first is rapidly becoming America alone. When we insult and cast doubt on the friendship we have for allies that have stuck with us for 80, 100, 200 years, and we embrace those dictators of the most repressive regimes around the world, we are rapidly ending up on the wrong side of history. We are losing public opinion everywhere in the world. It is absolutely false when this administration claims that America is respected again. The United States and this particular regime are respected by similar dictators, but not by democratic people around the world. And the result is going to be felt not just in political terms, but in economic and security terms as well. The post-World War II architecture that you spoke of was a system in which, yes, the United States was the strongest power and had the lead, but it worked because the United States mostly, certainly not always, but mostly played by the same rules that it had helped to establish. And it worked in cooperation with key allies in every part of the world. To abandon that and to say the only thing we need is American strength and American economic power will cause us to lose in influence, in the ability to shape events outside the world, outside the U.S., is more likely to cause conflict in the world. And as I said, I talk to people in China and Russia still, and the Chinese are literally laughing at the way the United States is cutting its educational lead, cutting its scientific lead, dismantling diplomacy, refusing to be a partner in solving humanitarian crises around the world. All of this makes those in China feel very happy.
That is a very powerful and sobering analysis. Now, I know we need to let you go, but I just want to thank you for taking some time to talk with us today. We've been talking with Thomas Countryman, former Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Nonproliferation and acting Undersecretary for Arms Control. Thank you so much, Tom, for your time today. I really genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Best of luck.
Thank you. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to open up the phone lines and get your calls when we come back on WCPT.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. Mostly sunny skies here for this afternoon, with temperatures holding rather steady. Breezy west winds around 15 to 20 miles per hour, gusting as high as 40. And then for tonight, partly cloudy skies with a low around 47. Saturday, sunshine, high of 67 degrees. Sunday, plenty of blue skies and sun, high around 68. That's your latest Chicago weather update.
Currently, it's 70.
This is a WCPT moment in labor. When Serena Williams won her title at the Tennis Grand Slam tournament, we know she gets the same prize money as her male counterpart. However, prior to 1973, that wasn't always the case. When Billie Jean King captured her first Wimbledon title in 1966, she was surprised to find out that the winner of the men's tournament received £2,000, while she only received £750. After being unable to find any tournaments for women, King and 8 other women formed their own tournament, the Virginia Slims Invitational, where each woman was paid $1 before posing for the famous picture of them each holding up their dollar, with the caption, "Contract Pros." While the move was bold, the pay discrepancies continued. King threatened to boycott the 1973 U.S. Open unless the women were paid the same as the men. Thanks to a grant from Band Deodorant, both the men and women singles would take home $25,000. Despite the progress at the U.S. Open, it wouldn't be until 1984 that the Australian Open would execute equal pay, followed by the French Open in 2006, and finally Wimbledon in 2007.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. The phone lines are open. We got a little window where we can get a bunch of calls in before we get to our next guest. Again, we can always talk about anything on your mind. Call or text us at 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. What a really fascinating conversation with Thomas Countryman there. As I noted, it's a sober analysis, but it's very revealing that a former member of the U.S. Foreign Service was talking about how upset that diplomatic community is. He was very open about using the term fascism to describe what we're seeing out of the Trump administration. For me, very, very revealing when people who've devoted their life to representing the country are troubled to that level by what's going on there. I think it's really, really interesting. A lot more we can think about there. But let's get to the callers. We've got Jim from Chicago. Hey, Jim, welcome back to WCPT. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Yeah. Hi, Professor Muck. The Republicans are bound to determine which away disease. You've got the elevator shoes down there in Florida who's saying that you don't need to vaccinate your child. Just take your chances. Then you've got Kennedy sitting there, and Senator Warren asked him about the pandemic, and he shrugged his shoulders. Oh, what do you mean 1 million people died? Do you acknowledge that? He goes, I don't know. Now, he's running the health department, and not only we're being suppressed by their secret police, but it's dangerous to the physical You can't wish away disease, Professor. You can't do it. I mean, I never. Have you ever heard anything in the history of the history of the Homo sapien wishing away disease? I've never heard of it.
Well, I mean, societies that were, maybe not science-based, right? But I think that's the whole point of why science and research and these academic communities who are objectively and empirically studying the world are so important, right? Where it's like we're going back to an era of the mystics, and like you said, we can sort of wish these things away, but that's not how pandemics and diseases work.
Absolutely. And then I just saw a doctor from Northwestern mentioned that I think 87 children have died of measles so far. Ebola is breaking out again, with cutting off our U.S. aid around the world. And the problem with it is we are living in a glass house here. I mean, all citizens, any disease that they're contract, we could easily contract ourselves. I think any scientist must be aware of that.
Well, and this is an important point, Jim, because you think about, there's a reason that we federalize these things, right? That we offer to say, hey, we want mandates that go across the entire country, because if Illinois says we're going to have, mandates for kids and we're going to encourage a particular health protocol, and then Florida says we're not going to do that, you suddenly get a divide and it makes all of us less safe. I mean, we can try to approach this state by state, but the reality is we are crossing lines and people are going to be exposed to these things. It is a dramatic development, and watching RFK yesterday was so hard, right? I mean, we have a real scientific community that for years has devoted itself to keeping the country safe, and now this is the best and the brightest that we have to represent that community. I mean, just sort of very deeply, deeply troubling.
Yeah, and real quick, I remember Jonas Salk, when he came up with the vaccination for polio. They asked him, don't you want to make any money on this, Jonas? Don't you want to make any money? He says, would I sell you the sun? Would I sell you the sun? Right. In other words, I'm just grateful I happened upon this vaccination. And I think that goes for any vaccination. Look at penicillin. I mean, look at the history of penicillin. That was happy, he wasn't exactly looking for it, but we found it. But that saved millions and millions of lives. But we cannot allow this. I agree, Professor. We got to get the midterm. It isn't a question of got to get them. Mm-hmm. We have to get them. We have to get them. And then you have a great weekend. And thank you, Professor.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks so much, Jim. I really, really appreciate it. You're right. You're highlighting the dangers of when we politicize science and medicine, and that's what we're seeing right now. And we're gonna have a divided country where, in some states, we're gonna have real good scientific care for our families and our children, where vaccines are mandated and where we continue to have fluoride in the water, and we'll have other states where that's not the case. And I do think it's likely that we're going to see some real differences in terms of the health outcomes because of that. But at the end of the day, we're all in one united country, and if one state is being less safe, all of us are going to be less safe. I think it's a sobering reality that we are facing right now. And again, pretty stunned by the recent decision in Florida to stop requiring vaccines. So, but why don't we take a quick break, and then we can get back to a bunch more callers. And again, phone lines, text lines are open, and that number is 773-763-9278. We will be right back on WCPT.
This is a WCPT Veteran Minute. After working several odd jobs in New York City, Henry Johnson found his way into the National Guard during World War I. Johnson was assigned to the 369th Infantry Regiment, but the all-black unit was better known as the Harlem Hellfighters. The Hellfighters' first task was assisting the French Fourth Army. On May 15, 1918, Hellfighter Johnson noticed Germans attempting to break in. Johnson retreated to get backup from the French troops, noticing German soldiers were attempting to kidnap another Hellfighter. Despite standing at only 5'4", Johnson sprung into action. With only 3 bullets and a bolo knife, Johnson was able to kill 4 enemy soldiers and wounded 21 others, causing them to retreat, saving himself and his men. However, Johnson received a total of 21 injuries all over his body, including his left foot being shattered. Johnson was discharged, and his papers did not show his heroism or his injury, leaving him unable to receive any disability compensation, leaving Johnson penniless at the time of his death at age 36. Johnson's heroism went unnoticed for decades until President Barack Obama awarded him the Medal of Honor in 2015.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Because that's how we roll. Welcome back to WCPT. The phone lines are open. We got some callers waiting. We'll get to in just a second, but I do want to call attention to Mark. He texted us and he asked if I could comment on my thoughts on whether Trump's reciprocal tariffs will be upheld. He points out that they are illegal based on the lower court rulings. This is a really, really important question, and we're going to talk about this later with Barbara McQuade. The reality is that absolutely the power to tax is a power that resides with the Congress, not with the president. And so there are a couple things that are playing out here. One is a power struggle between the courts and the president, but also between Congress and the president. And what we need to see is Congress reasserting some of its power and whether the courts themselves will reassert some of that power. One of the things that we've seen is that the lower courts have been actually very, very aggressive at calling Donald Trump out for some of the unconstitutional actions that they've engaged in. But the upper levels, the Supreme Court, has not done that. So there's a divide. And that's one of the big questions that I want to grapple and ask Barbara McQuade about is what do we make of this divide between lower courts, which are absolutely pushing back against Trump, and then the Supreme Court, which seems to be enabling him. So really, really good question, Mark. All right, let's jump to the callers. We've got Max from North Carolina. You're up next. Hey, Max, welcome to WCPT.
Oh, hi. Thank you. So, like if you look back to the 80s when Reagan came into office, you're going to see our debt start to climb. And you could see that over the next, 40-something years, 45 years, that things have not changed. We've been going in the same direction where we are in debt, major debt, where our jobs have been shifted overseas, and Bill Clinton was one of the big guys that sent most of our jobs, the Democrat, that people praise. So then we're in these endless wars that most people don't support. They don't support starving children and stuff like that. While we have, I think it's 15 million American children that go to bed hungry every day, and 93,000 vets. 93,000 vets that go hungry every day. We have, I think the number is down right now from 22 to 17 vets a day that commit suicide. You people could look that up. And this is where our country is at today. The Democrat nor the Republicans do not help the American people. If you go out and don't vote, if you do not vote, you will see that things will not change. If you go vote, all you're doing really is you're just satisfying these people that you're still supporting them in the direction, the down direction that this country is going to.
Thanks, Max. Max, I think you're highlighting a sense of alienation and disillusionment that I think there are a lot of Americans that feel that way. Especially, you were highlighting a couple different priorities, right? To say that to you, it feels like the country has lost what's important, and we should be thinking more about veterans. And I don't disagree with that, right? I think we could have a real meaningful conversation about that. And if we circle back to kind of my opening point about optimism, that optimistic vision is dependent upon us also, sort of moving past Trump. I think Trump is a uniquely anti-democratic threat that has to be addressed. The country has to move past that. But once that occurs, I don't think we can go back to politics as normal. We can't go back to the normal partisanship. I think you have to get both Democrats and Republicans who want to solve problems. So I think this is also a challenge for the Democratic Party. Once we move past this unique moment that is the threat of Donald Trump, how do we govern in a way that doesn't alienate people across the system? How do we bring people into the fold? How do we address people who feel like they've been left behind? And that's, thinking about veterans, but also thinking about marginalized communities who also have struggled to have their voice be heard, right? So I think those are all challenges that once you get past the immediate threat to the democracy that have to be addressed, because your voice is not alone in that way. So thank you so much for calling, Max. All right, let's jump to Paul in Seattle, who wants to talk about the current administration. Hey, Paul, always enjoy talking with you. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Well, I mean, if you want to take Max seriously, you have to ask what changed. You look at, first of all, I have to say this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know what's wrong with that guy's brain. I guess it's the worm.
Could be the worms. Could be the worms, yeah.
Well, I mean, he said yesterday, first of all, he said that, I think it was Meg Hassan who said that you are quoted as saying that no vaccine is ever been proven safe and effective. He said, I never said that. Yeah. Then she played the tape for him. Then he said, I would not recommend that you get a COVID vaccine. And then he said, no vaccine has ever been proven safe and effective.
Right.
He said right there what she played on the tape for him. And he said that the COVID vaccine has never been clinically proved safe and effective. I don't even think this guy's a good lawyer, because at this point, we don't need clinical evidence that COVID is safe and effective. We have billions of doses, empirical evidence that it's safe and effective. Billions of doses have been administered to demonstrate. I mean, it's like, you mean you want to go back into laboratory studies about whether it's safe and effective after billions of doses? We already have the data we need. It's called empirical data.
Yep.
So I don't trust this guy. And you look at, okay, Max, what happened at the turn of the century, in 1900, the average life expectancy for an American was just under 50 years old, about 48.9 years. By 1950, it was 65. That's a 30% increase. And by the end of by 2000, the average increase, in fact, it was more than that. By probably about 1985, it was up to 78. That's a 56% increase in a century. Yeah. And in the first part of the century, it was adjustments. It really wasn't health care. It was adjustments to workplace safety and public health safety. Public health, we weren't just spreading virulent diseases around for various reasons, like typhoid Mary. That was and safety in the workplace. People died on the job every day. And since 1950, and especially since Medicare, it was health care that came in the second half of the 20th century. And now they want to go backwards on this. That's exactly what they're doing.
Make America great, Paul, right?
Yeah, well, I don't understand. Robert F. Kennedy he was the poster child for stupid yesterday. This whole his appearance before Congress it was in some ways, well, it was embarrassing to watch. Not that I'm embarrassed for him. Embarrassment means that we both have to share in that. But I just thought, you're pathetic. I've never heard anything so stupid in my life. When in my generation, which is the baby boom generation, we eradicated polio, measles, mumps, whooping cough. I mean, the list goes on. Eradicated them. And now we have children dying of measles in Texas. Other states in Florida is getting rid of all their vaccinations. It's crazy. I mean, these people are nuts. And I remember when the vaccination, because I was a brand new teacher in the late 80s, and my first job was in special ed. And that was, and I taught in a private school, and the part of my first training was, there's rumors going around, and this was when Andrew Wakefield, the doctor from England, Great Britain, was saying that vaccines cause autism. And that was part of my first training was, no, they don't. They do not. This is false. And you're going to have parents telling you this. This is false information. And Andrew Wakefield.
Go ahead.
He was proven a fraud. And one of the things that because Robert F. Kennedy wants to sell his diet supplements and say this is better, Andrew Wakefield was not only proven wrong, he was not an opponent of vaccines. He was trying to market his own vaccine. Yeah. That's what he was trying to do.
It's charlatans. Yeah, no, I mean, it is. We're seeing a referendum on science, right? Because you're right that they're not willing to engage in a real conversation about the data. The data is overwhelming. The scientific community, there is a consensus on all of this, right? We know we have all the answers that they suggest we need more data on. It's really fundamentally dangerous and trying to throw us back to an era before we believed in science. Paul, I got to scoot to another caller, but thanks so much for weighing in. I appreciate it. All right, let's move to Shelley from Chicago. Hey, Shelley, welcome to WCPT.
Hi there. I just have two suggestions for people of a book and a DVD that they might find inspirational and enjoyable.
Great.
The book is called How to Stand Up to a Dictator, and it's by the Filipina author Maria Ressa, Ressa, who won the Nobel Prize in I forget what year, but it's a really good book. It's good to read. I mean, she's a great writer as well as an activist, and she talks about her struggles with Filipino dictators and also the
Marcos family. Yes, yeah,
and others. Yeah, the book was written in 2022, so it's pretty current. But what's really interesting is how she and her team used social media to influence a lot of good things, and the research they did showing how Russia and others influenced the American elections and others. It's just a really great read, fascinating, and I think it's maybe got some kernels of ideas for people who know how to do stuff with social media, some ideas that we might not be, in America, that we might not be thinking about right now. So,
well, and the Filipino case is great because it allows us to step outside of the United States to say that we're not alone. Other countries around the world and throughout history have struggled with some of the same problems. And I haven't read the book, but I have seen her interviewed a couple times. And the way that she talks about what she went through in the Philippines and what we see today, she is making those comparisons between, what we're living through in the Trump administration and what she went through. So that's great. Okay. You said there was another book as well.
Yeah, well, that's her book, and she also, the other thing is I just happened upon a DVD the other day called Servant of the People. It was produced in 2014, and the star of it is Volodymyr Zelensky. Before he was president, he was an actor and a comic, and this is such a great video. There's only one season that's available on DVD or Netflix, but the premise is that he's a high school teacher in Kyiv.
Yes.
And he's like, one day he just lambasts the current government with a lot of profanity. And, they're terrible. They take bribes. They don't work, blah, blah, blah. A student of his takes a video. The video goes on the Internet. Lo and behold, he almost unwillingly becomes the president of Ukraine. And it's very funny, and it's like if we had a comic with the character of Volodymyr Zelensky elected as U.S. president today, but his whole cabinet was in place from Trump.
Sure.
How would you deal with it?
Right.
And it's just lasting. It's just nice to see the city of Kyiv looking beautiful and people living normal lives before the Russian invasion. So I recommend that as like a soporific for us.
Thank you so much, Shelley. That's really, really good to know. And you're absolutely right. I have not watched the show with Zelensky, but I have heard wonderful reviews. And, it's sort of, as a side note, it's interesting to see his evolution from a comedian, actor, to suddenly being the president of a wartime country, and the way in which he has embraced that. There have been lots of comparisons to him and Winston Churchill in terms of how he rose to that moment, especially in the early years. But it makes for a really, really interesting study. So we are up against the break. Thank you so much, Shelley. We're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be chatting with Kathleen Sances, who is president and CEO of the Political Action Committee Gun Violence Prevention. We'll be back in just a second to have that conversation.
When it comes to the vitamins and supplements you take, quality counts. If you have questions or concerns about the vitamins you plan on taking, we're happy to help. Mark Drugs, better health and care for you and your pets. The most common signs you need a probiotic are if you have taken an antibiotic and need to balance out the gut bacteria, you find yourself getting constantly sick, or you feel bloated, unwell, or have skin issues. We carry high-quality probiotics at our pharmacies, such as Florastor, Floragen, and what I refer to as the silver bullet, Orthobiotic, which combines multiple strains of beneficial bacteria and friendly yeast to stimulate optimal gut flora. Get to know your pharmacist. Caring for you, your family, and your overall well-being is what our pharmacists at Mark Drugs stand for. You have a choice when it comes to your health care, and a great choice is Mark Drugs in Roselle and Deerfield, where you get better health and care for you and your pets. Check out markdrugs.com for the pet of the month.
Whether it's day or night, hot flashes due to menopause can be unpredictable. That's why there's Veoza, a prescription treatment proven to reduce the number and severity of hot flashes day and night that can start working in as early as 1 week. Based on clinical studies measuring efficacy at 4 and 12 weeks, individual results may vary. Talk to your healthcare provider about what this may mean for you. For moderate to severe vasomotor symptoms or hot flashes and night sweats due to menopause, Veoza can cause serious side effects, including liver problems. Your doctor will do blood tests before and during treatment. Stop Veoza and call your doctor if you have symptoms of liver problems, such as feeling more tired than usual, decreased appetite, nausea, vomiting, itching, yellowing of the eyes or skin, pale stool, dark urine, or stomach pain. Don't use Veoza if you have cirrhosis, severe kidney problems, kidney failure, or take CYP1A2 inhibitors. Ask your doctor about Veoza. To learn more, call 1-866-239-1637 or go to Veoza.com. That's VEOZAH.com. Paid for by Stellus Pharma.
Eggland's Best, the only eggs with more fresh and delicious taste, plus superior nutrition. Eggland's Best, better taste, better nutrition, better eggs.
AP News, I'm Ed Donahue. Stocks are lower at the close following the release of the latest jobs numbers from the Labor Department. Here's the AP Sagar Magani.
Employers added just 22,000 jobs, with the unemployment rate rising to 4.3%, the highest since 2021. After the July report showed a disappointing 79,000 jobs added, an enraged President Trump fired the economist in charge of putting it together. Asked yesterday what he expected from today's report.
The real numbers that I'm talking about are going to be whatever it is, but will be in a year from now.
Predicting job growth like the nation's never seen. For now, though, the jobs market has lost momentum, partly due to uncertainty over the president's economic policies. Sagar Magani, Washington.
Governor Brian Kemp says he's sending the Georgia National Guard later this month to Washington, D.C. And the latest indication President Trump's law enforcement operation in the nation's capital will drag on. Staying in Georgia, there was an ICE raid in Georgia at the site where a South Korean auto company, Hyundai, makes electric vehicles.
The investigation resulted in the arrest of 475 individuals and is focused on ensuring accountability for those who violate the law and uphold the rule of law.
Homeland Security Special Agent in Charge Stephen Schrank says a majority of those detained are from South Korea. 2 months after deadly floods hit the state, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a ban on youth cabins in floodways and a requirement for camp safety plans. He met with some parents.
They pleaded for swift action. They pleaded that their daughters did not die in vain. They wanted laws to be passed so that other parents would not experience the hell that they have been through.
27 Camp Mystic campers and counselors in Texas were swept to their deaths by floodwaters. This is AP News. Google has been fined more than $3 billion in an ad tech antitrust case.
The European Union says Google breached the bloc's competition rules by favoring its own digital advertising services. It's the fourth antitrust penalty for the company. The bloc's executive branch, the European Commission, also ordered Google to end its self-preferencing practices and address conflicts of interest in the advertising technology supply chain. Google is planning to appeal and called the decision wrong, saying it'll harm European businesses. The decision comes more than 2 years after the European Commission announced antitrust charges against Google. I'm Haya Panjwani.
Artificial intelligence company Anthropic has agreed to pay more than $1 billion to settle a class action lawsuit by book authors who say the company took pirated copies of their works to train its chatbot. The company has agreed to pay authors about $3,000 for each of an estimated 500,000 books covered by the settlement. Ed Donahue, AP News.
This is 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Megan Mulford. Sunshine mixed with clouds at times this afternoon, with daytime highs approaching 70. Winds out of the west 10 to 20 miles an hour. Partly cloudy skies again. Tonight, lows dip down to about 47. Sunshine mixed with clouds at times tomorrow. Daytime highs approaching 67. Sunshine mixed with clouds at times Sunday, with daytime highs approaching 68. 74 Monday. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Right now, 70.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's Progressive Talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Before we get to our next guest, got something very exciting to announce. WCPT is giving away a pair of tickets to see the First Lady of Television at Northlight Theater on September 13th. Why specifically September 13th? Well, on September 13th, you can meet WCPT's very own Joan Esposito. That's a pretty exciting little benefit there. We may even have some WCPT shirts for a few lucky listeners. I've actually got one of those shirts, Lady B, and they're fantastic. I really like them. But if you can't make it on September 13th, the show is playing from September 4th through October 5th. So Lady B is going to take the third caller. I should remind everybody the contests running on WCPT are open to listeners 18 or older and residents of the greater Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana area. One entry per person, one winner per household. Void were prohibited by law. Listeners may only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. Complete rules are available on our website at WCPT.com by clicking on the contest tab. All right, we are joined next by Kathleen Sances, who is president and CEO of the Political Action Committee Gun Violence Prevention, GPAC of Illinois, which is Illinois' leading gun violence prevention organization. Welcome to WCPT, Kathleen. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me on, Professor Muck.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can start by just telling our listeners a little bit about your organization, what inspired the creation of GPAC, and maybe even what motivated you personally to take such an important leadership role.
GPAC started in 2013. It was created by survivors who were frustrated that they weren't seeing any action being taken to pass any gun laws that would keep communities safe. Our founder is Tom Vandenberg, and he lost his son at age 15 in 1992 at a party in Rogers Park. And Tom went on to work in the 90s, like with the Million Mom March and Brady and other organizations who also were in the movement, and he decided that we could make a difference if we focused on the state capitol in Springfield. And so we started engaging in elections and working to elect lawmakers who would say yes to gun reform in Illinois.
You know, that's really interesting as we think about, specifically as you're talking about the difference between the national and the state level. Gun violence prevention often faces gridlock at the federal level. So what are the advantages or limitations that you see or focusing at the state level? Why start there?
It's really all about money. Elections have become so expensive, and to engage in congressional campaigns across the country would cost millions and millions of dollars. But we thought we could wrap our heads around raising enough money to engage in a state rep or a state senate campaign. And we've been able to do that. But I have to say that since we started in 2013, these races have become much more expensive as well.
Do you find that it's easier? I mean, I think about the federal level. I mean, every time there's a mass shooting, we have this conversation about needing to pass legislation, and inevitably it doesn't go anywhere. Is it better to work at the state level? I mean, can you get more meaningful work done at a state level versus the federal level?
So we've been able to get a lot of work done. We have passed 7 gun reform bills in our state. We have done almost everything we can to protect what we can inside our borders, right?
Yeah.
But our problem is that we're surrounded by states with weaker gun laws.
Yeah.
And those guns are coming in over our borders. So we can do this work because you can't sit back and do nothing.
Right.
Right? But in the end, we're going to need these laws passed at the federal level.
This is such an important point, right? You can have the best initiatives, the best legislation operating at a state level, but if the federal government or other states don't also join in, it makes it impossible to make meaningful differences. So, well, you were talking about some of the initiatives. What do you see as the top legislative priorities of GPAC? What are you focusing on now, specifically in Illinois?
Well, the very first initiative we championed, and you know what? This actually had been filed and carried for 16 years in the Illinois General Assembly and never got out of committee, was to hold gun industry members accountable. Gun dealers. We had so many gun dealers in Illinois, and we're getting data back that the crime guns that police are recovering all over the state are actually coming from our own gun dealers. Well, what can we do? We created a kind of like a business license. It's called a certification, where they had to be good citizens, good corporate citizens, and train their employees to look for people who should not buy guns, videotaping the outside, making sure that to reduce theft, taping inside so that we're seeing the transactions, who's in there, and allowing random inventory checks by law enforcement. So by doing that was enacted in 2017, we have seen a decrease in thefts from gun stores it's down to almost, it's 2%.
That's really extraordinary.
Right. And we've always focused on reducing illegal gun access, right?
Yeah.
And we think that's the problem. So everything we do is focused on kind of cutting that pipeline off.
Sure. That's really, I mean, it's very exciting to see some success like that. One of the things I was thinking about is that, Illinois has a mix of urban, suburban, and rural communities. How do you navigate these very different perspectives on gun policy across these constituencies? That must be a real challenge.
It is a challenge, and that's why we focus on illegal gun access, and we make it clear in our messaging when we're working across different demographics in the state. We make sure who our audience is and how we speak about it, right? The thing is like in rural areas, we're finding that the highest incidence of gun death is suicide. And it's in these areas. So, I mean, we need to get in there and educate about that. And that's why we recently just passed the Safe at Home Act, which requires you to lock your guns up securely in your home if there are people at risk or children in your home.
That's great.
That message is much different than when we're talking to people in the south and west sides of the city, right?
Absolutely, right. That's an important point. It's not just thinking suburban, rural, or urban, right? Even within the city, there's very, very different perspectives on that. Let's jump to your position on President Trump's threats to deploy the National Guard to Chicago. Your organization, you've released a couple press releases over the last couple days. Tell us a little bit about your position and how you are understanding and responding to this threat.
Yeah, once again, this administration is putting out disinformation. I know that's no surprise to you.
Right.
or your audience. And so, we feel it's our role to correct that. And, violence and crime have steadily been decreasing here in Chicago and in our state. And that's because we're doing all of the right things, right? So we've had the lowest incidence of murder in June, July, and August in 60 years. That means something's going on here. Yeah. We know what we're doing. We don't need somebody else coming in to fix our problem, because there isn't a problem. We still have gun violence, and all of it is too much, but we use evidence-based systems to reduce it. So we also wanted to point out to this administration that they have reversed all of the federal help that we had been getting in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So they rolled back all the funding that community violence intervention groups were getting. They rolled back funding for mental health services. They have diverted the ATF members who normally would be out inspecting gun dealers are now working for ICE. Mm-hmm. And they've also took away any funding for gun violence research, which informs our work about how best to solve the problem.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, and as we said, we have a few ideas. Like if this administration really wants to stop gun violence in Chicago, then we have some ideas for them. Like, to have Congress pass background checks on all gun sales, including gun shows, restore funding for violence intervention and mental health services, and here's a big one, ban weapons of war and machine gun conversion devices. That's a good start, Mr. President.
Yeah, no, that's right. Especially, when you think about the visuals of rolling the National Guard into Chicago and the militarization of the police in Chicago and all of that, right? That is sending the wrong message for how to think about this. I really, the press release you had, I think it was yesterday, you said Illinois' significant progress in passing common sense gun laws to prevent access to illegal weapons has helped reduce crime. But without meaningful reform at the federal level, guns will cross our borders and violence will persist. If the White House wants to get serious about violence, it can start by supporting gun safety instead of the gun lobby. I thought that was a really, really powerful message. Do you want anything sort of additional to add to that?
Well, we have seen how many millions and millions of dollars that the gun lobby has given to this president in both elections. So, and you know what? He's going to reward them for that, because that's one of the reasons he's sitting in that office. And we have to be aware that that's what's happening and work at local level to change that, right? And elect people who will vote against those policies of the gun lobby.
You were talking about the gun lobby and how powerful, even in Illinois, it remains. So what strategies have you found to be most effective in countering its influence? Because you're right. The NRA is a very different organization than it was 25 years ago, but still effective. It still has the ear of the president. So how do you respond to that influence?
Well, we really turned the tide when we started working in Illinois. The Illinois gun lobby really own this space. And they had a 30-year head start on us, to be honest with you. And so we started educating people just about gun violence, right? And then asking them to become supporters with us to stop it. And so we built a database, right, of supporters. And the most powerful thing that we do is we ask them to send contacts into their lawmakers. And that's how you make the difference. Even somebody who is bought and paid for by the gun lobby, say in one of the other counties, if he or she is getting hundreds of emails from their own constituents saying, we want you to vote this way, they need to do it, or they won't have their job next time.
So this sort of leads into my next question. As a political action committee, as a PAC, you directly support candidates. What do you look for when deciding which candidates to endorse or support? What kind of messaging matters for you?
We start out with a candidate questionnaire, and we ask them if they support policies that we've already enacted. We have to play defense all the time. So we want to make sure that they're going to support them, not roll them back. And then we ask them if they will support the future agenda that we have. So we do that at the start. We'll do an endorsement. And once they're elected, we put out a report card every year.
Hold them accountable.
We keep track of how they're doing. Yes.
Well, that's great. No, that's important, right? Because the messaging matters a lot. A lot of times this can be a very heavy topic to people who find that to be the case. Are there any significant victories that GPAC or others have had that you think you would point people to say that, hey, we can make a difference and this matters? What are some success stories that you like to highlight?
Well, we've worked now for 12 years, and we've been able to get the roll calls we need in Springfield. It's much easier than it used to be. And I think that's because of the relationships that we've built with the newer lawmakers coming in, that we can get to 30 and we can get beyond it. And I'm very proud because the initiatives we passed this year were passed on bipartisan roll calls.
That's good. That is good. That's a good sign, right? All right. So looking ahead, what would meaningful progress on gun violence prevention in Illinois look like over the next 5 to 10 years? What is your vision? What would your wish list be as you think about what you can do over the next decade?
We want the gun homicide rate to be lower than it is in Los Angeles and New York.
No.
So the per capita, we're much too high. It's trending downward. It's declining, and that's what we want to see. But until we get that gun homicide rate, and like say in the city down to under 500 for the year, then 300 for the year, and we keep working on that, that's success.
I like it. Kathleen, this has been so enjoyable. These topics are hard, but I so appreciate the energy and activism you bring to it. We've been talking with Kathleen Sances, who is president and CEO of the Political Action Committee, Gun Violence Prevention, GPAC of Illinois. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being on.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this on WCPT.
If cage walls could talk, with Jody Whittaker.
I actually learned about you and your sanctuary because of Rocky the Coyote. For those who don't know, Rocky was found as a pup. He was found by some people who thought he was a puppy, and they took him to a local animal shelter, and they realized he was a coyote. He was transported to Illinois' Cook County Forest Preserves and has since been stuck in a tiny cage for more than 5 years now. Pat has graciously and generously offered Rocky a forever home at the Wild Animal Sanctuary, so thank you so much for that.
If cage walls could talk, Saturdays at 5.
Excuse me, miss. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can you recommend a bank that offers a full suite of commercial banking products along with excellent service?
Yes, ABOC.
What about a bank that has been in Chicago for more than 100 years and really understands the local business climate?
ABOC.
But I manage a labor union. Can you recommend a bank that really understands how labor unions operate and what banking products they need?
Again, ABOC. ABOC first opened its doors in downtown Chicago in 1922 and understands the local business climate better than anyone. ABOC was founded by labor unions and still has union employees and shareholders today, so they really understand how unions tick and how their needs may be different. But whether you're with a labor union or another type of business, whether you're large or small or something in between, ABOC will always make you feel like you're their most important customer. Visit ABOC.com to learn more.
Wow, thank you, random person on the street. I'm going to visit ABOC.com today.
Member FDIC. WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Very, very interesting interview there with Kathleen Sances. Good to hear her perspective and the work that they're doing on the ground, trying to think deeply and proactively about gun violence. Just want to remind everybody that because the 2026 midterm election can't come soon enough, WCPT has already begun interviewing candidates and posting the audio on our website. Visit heartlandsignal.com/candidates to hear and share the latest interviews, including U.S. Senate candidate Colin Allred, California candidate for governor Xavier Becerra. I did that interview. That was a really fascinating conversation, both about his candidacy for California governor, but also thinking about public health, the vaccines, what the Trump administration is doing. That's just a really, really good conversation. I highly recommend it. So find the candidate interviews tab at the top of our website. All right, we've got a few minutes, and I wanted to bring up a topic that I don't think is getting a ton of attention, but strikes me as really important. And that was this U.S. attack that the United States carried out on a Venezuelan boat. So the president announced a couple days ago that the U.S. had carried out a strike against a drug-carrying vessel in the South Caribbean, killing 11 narco-terrorists. And that's how Trump referred to them. He posted the video on social media talking about this military operation, saying that these were members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. And Trump noted that the vessel was international waters and was transporting illegal narcotics bound for the United States. So we've got a clip from Chris Van Hollen talking about this, and I want us to go to that clip, listen to it, and then when we come back, talk a little bit about that and the significance of this in terms of whether this is consistent with international law. Lady B, can we play that?
I think at the outset, people should understand that the Trump administration, when they submitted their budget this year, they cut funding for the Drug Enforcement Agency. They cut funding for the organized crime drug enforcement task forces. That's $500 million. Those are not things you cut if you're serious about preventing drugs from coming into the United States. What this was an extrajudicial killing, pure and simple. It was illegal. As you said, we only have the Trump administration's word to take for who was on that boat. But even if they were right, we're not in a war with Venezuela. We're not in a conflict with Venezuela. And as you also know, our own intelligence agencies earlier concluded that there's no kind of collusion between the Venezuelan government regime, Maduro, and these drug gangs. So this was illegal on many counts. And I think the Trump administration just wanted to get a video of a boat blowing up because they did that at the same time they're cutting the federal budget when it comes to actual drug enforcement and serious drug trafficking. I think we've sort of gotten immune to the idea that, even people on this boat, we don't know exactly who they are, and presidents should not just be ordering a hit, essentially a hit, an extrajudicial hit on this boat. In addition to the fact, Chris, if you were actually serious about going after drug kingpins, what you would do is you'd interdict this boat, and then you would follow the chain of evidence upstream and identify the kingpins, rather than go after these drug runners, even if that's what they were doing. As you indicated, the best guess was that this boat was bound for one of the islands in the Caribbean, not to the mainland United States. So this does appear like so much of what Trump does, to sort of just seize the moment and distract the country from all the other things that the Trump administration is doing to actually make people's lives more difficult.
There's a lot to break down here, and I think the final point that Van Hollen makes is a really important one about the distraction and the love that Trump has for performative violence. So again, this is getting a little bit of attention. Our listeners maybe not have even noticed this, but you can go out and find the video. There's been some news coverage of it, but the president himself shared that video showing this boat with 11 individuals being blown up on social media. All right, I want to come back to this, but we got to sneak a quick break in again. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the international law dynamics that are involved in this. One of the things I do is I teach a course on international law, and so this strikes me as particularly problematic. So we will be right back after a quick break on WCPT.
Straight Talk presents The Math of More. Here's how it works. When you say yes to more with Straight Talk, you're left with more for all the other good stuff. So getting an unlimited plan starting at just $25 a month equals more savings for your family's weekend adventures. And with a network covered by Verizon, you can share more from wherever you go. It's simple math, really. More equals more with Straight Talk. Available at straighttalk.com and Walmart. Taxes and fees apply. The $25 plan requires a compatible unlocked device and a new line of service. Additional terms apply.
Listen up, fellow timeshare owners. If you're a timeshare owner and you want out at all costs, you're done, frustrated, tired of wasting money, you don't use the darn thing. Get out now. Hire the best Bulldog timeshare cancellation team in the business. Their in-house legal team, headed by a timeshare cancellation lawyer, can help you fight the biggest and baddest companies out there that sell timeshare. At some point, you were using your timeshare, but now you're not, and you're tired of wasting money. Before you go to the poorhouse, call right now and learn how you can stop the maintenance fees and put more money back in your pocket. Their services cost you a lot less than you think, and you'll save a lot of money over time. Call the Timeshare Exit Hotline now. It's a free consultation.
800-296-0150. 800-296-0150. 800-296-0150. That's 800-296-0150.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Partly cloudy skies tonight with a low temperature of 51 and west winds at 15 to 30. Saturday, sunshine with a high temperature of 67 degrees and west winds at 10 to 20 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine and a high of 68. Monday, plenty of sun with a high of 74. Tuesday, partly sunny and a high temperature around 79. Wednesday, sunny with a high of 78. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 70.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Before the break, we were talking about this attack that the United States carried out on a drug vessel or carrying 11 what Trump called narco-terrorists. And we listened to the clip from Chris Van Hollen talking about this and thinking about this as an extrajudicial killing. And I think it's worth a few minutes of our time to think through this. So there are really two categories for when you can and cannot use violence. And we acknowledge that when the United States is at war with somebody, then violence is legitimate. So if the United States is at war with another country, the violence that occurs there is seen as legitimate and just. But we have a different category for terrorism, for narco-terrorism, and we call that a crime. And so generally what has happened in the past is that when the United States captures or detains individuals that are running drugs, and this sort of stuff happens all the time, we treat it as a criminal activity and we detain them, and then we use the legal system to prosecute them. And there's a real reason for doing that, right? We don't know the nature of those 11 individuals on the boat there. We can assume that they were running drugs, but they are entitled to due process. And more often than not, how this happens is that the Coast Guard would intercede, try to capture them. Now, maybe not be successful, but the only way you can generally use violence legally in that context is if they were to use violence against the U.S. Coast Guard. And so what Trump is essentially doing here is conflating war and crime. So this is not to say that, running drugs into the United States is a good thing. It is a bad thing. But how we conceptualize that, how we understand that, is it is criminal activity. and we use the police or other entities to detain those individuals, and then we bring them to justice by presenting a case in front of a court of law. That is so important. And we've seen a variety of ways in which the President of the United States tries to violate that line, to say this isn't about law. This is about, him looking strong. This is about confronting terrorism. And the argument he's making is that this is something that Venezuela is doing. That Venezuela has effectively declared war on the United States, and that it is sending these narco-terrorists into the United States to harm the country. Well, that's one narrative, but that's not really how we understand war. It's not how we understand this dynamic. The better way to understand this as criminal behavior, and how you respond to criminal behavior is detain those individuals, arrest those individuals, and provide them with due process. But over and over and over again, we see this administration refusing to pursue things through the rule of law. We have one more clip that I want to play before we get to our next guest, and it's from Spencer Ackerman. He's a journalist who writes about national security issues, and he comments on the issue as well. And so, Lady B, let's listen to that now.
This one still feels to me like it is way out past the frontier of what we've seen.
Yeah, this was murder. This was murder on the high seas. The United States military carried out an illegal order. We don't know the name of the Navy commander on which of the different 8 warships off of Venezuela actually is responsible for the strike. But that officer decided to carry out an illegal order to blow up a civilian ship in international waters. Whatever the Trump administration puts out as a rationale for this,
which they have not provided yet, we should know.
That's right. But whatever rationale they come up with is not going to be worth the paper it's printed on, because there's just no way to tell us that they're doing something on our legs and telling us that it's raining.
This is important because Spencer Ackerman uses a really, really important word here. He says this is murder. And that sounds heavy, right? But I think it's accurate. If you're at war with another country, so if Lady B and I are at war with each other and we've declared war on each other, then violence is legitimate, and neither of us have engaged in murder. But if there's not an official war and we use violence, we talk about that as murder. And I think this is really what we're thinking about. This is a crime that the United States is now committing, going after these individuals that they're labeling as narco-terrorists. It's wrong, it's inaccurate, and it is dangerously blurring this line between war and criminal activity. And the fact that the president is sharing it on social media suggests that he's proud of this. So I think we're likely to see more of this, both in terms of the publication of it, but also in the action of it. And I think this is a really, really troubling development that we should talk more about. So, all right, I'm worried about that, but I'll tell you what I'm really excited about. Lady B is our next guest. So we are joined now by Gloria Browne-Marshall, who is a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's also a civil rights attorney and a playwright, an extraordinary person who wears many hats. I love when academics do lots of things and have lots of hats. I'm so excited to chat with her today. Gloria has a fascinating new book out titled A Protest History of the United States, and we're going to talk about her book today. Welcome to WCPT, Gloria.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to talk with you, but also to talk about your book and some of the ideas that you develop here. And specifically, you're talking about the history of protests in the United States, but you integrate some of your own protest experiences into the book. So I want to start maybe with a question, like what inspired you to write this book, and how do you understand it as different from most histories that are written about the United States?
What it really was, I was hearing many years ago when I started writing this book that protest didn't matter. It was ineffective. It didn't work. It's old-fashioned. We shouldn't do it. It's not worth it. I was also upset by the fact that a community organizer I heard about died. There was not enough money in her family to come together for a funeral. And I thought, here she is protesting and doing all this work, and now people are saying it was worthless. And I knew, as somebody who saw protests beyond just what we do in the street, that protest takes place in many different ways and forms, and that is a strategic tactic that has been used to change so many things. And we wake up embraced in protest results, and we forget how those results came to be. And so all those different things came together, and I was asked if I would put more of myself into my next book, because this is my 7th book.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure how to do that, because I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, and so I said, well, I'll use some family members who are long gone, so they can't complain. And then I really thought about the stories my mother used to tell me about my great-great-grandmother, Eliza, who was enslaved. And I said, you know what? Her life struggle to be this person she wanted to be is a protest against what they were putting on her and forcing her to be. And so then if you think of Rosa Parks not giving up her seat as protest, as well as the protests by SNCC and anti-war protests, then you see protest takes all these different forms. And so each generation of my family, in some ways or forms, would protest without it being in the street. I was the one who went to the street. They protested in their own ways. And I put that all together as part of the structure of the book, of telling my family's story, their relationship with the indigenous, because it starts with the indigenous and goes forward from there. Slave protests, labor protests, Haymarket. It's part of how we got this 8-hour workday that we take for granted. That came from protests. We have laws in the books, but the laws on the books don't mean anything if they're just paper. So protest takes those laws and makes them a reality that we live with every day. But we forget this. And so my book was meant to be not just archival information, but also memoir, and talk about different people who were involved in protests and different protests that actually changed our lives, but we've forgotten about altogether.
I really enjoy your perspective of saying protests can take many forms. Being in the streets is certainly one of them, but there's many other ways that can be done. And I also really enjoy that you frame U.S. history through the lens of protest movements and argue that dissent and resistance have been central to the American democracy from its founding. Right? I think that's something that a lot of people won't really realize until they dive into the history there. You see it, and not only that, you see it as a central protest, as the central catalyst for social and political progress. That's one of those things when I read that, I had to sit down and say, wow, that's really, really important. This vital mechanism for forcing the United States to confront the contradictions within its own history and expand rights. Why do you think protest is such a defining part of the American story? Because I find it very compelling.
Because we were born out of protest. The Declaration of Independence that we're going to be commemorating next year for the 250th anniversary is a protest document. It's stating we are not going to live under the rules that you set out, King George. We're going to break from you. These are the reasons why. Now, people rarely read the Declaration of Independence because if you read it, it would curl your toes. It doesn't say the things people think. They know the first 3 lines, and that's about it. So, but the idea of it, is that it's protesting against the government that was seen as oppressive. And so what bothers me, though, is not long after the country becomes, the United States of America, when immigrants come in and begin to protest the government, that's when you see the Aliens Act come into play that says, well, if you're protesting the government, you can be deported. And this is as early as 1790s. So, we've always had this 2 steps forward, 1 step back when it comes to this kind of tense relationship with protest. Certain people are allowed to protest about certain things and other people are not, especially those people on the periphery, women, people of color, immigrants. That's always been the case.
This is interesting. I'm curious. When I was reading your book, it felt empowering to me. Like to protest is to be an American, right? And is that how you feel about it? And I think that's a story that needs to be told, because so often we're thought, well, we only protest except for those extreme moments, and boy, I don't want to be seen out on the streets. But for me, it felt empowering to say, to be an American is to protest. What do you think about that?
I think we're known for our protests. Now, I have been in France as well as England when they've had protests, and even in Italy when they've had protests. Their protests are very organized. They know exactly when they're going to start, exactly when they're going to end, what streets they're going to go on, and they could be longer, they could get disruptive, but they're also very much contained. There's a protest going on right now we know nothing about. It could be in some small town or city somewhere. We're having protests all the time, and that was one of the problems I had with the book, is that we protest a lot, but we still discourage protesting, and we disparage protesters. But we're protesting all the time. When I say that police unions came out of protest, a lot of police officers will be the ones stopping other people from protesting, but they belong to unions where people died to create those police unions. And so we forget so quickly how big a role protest has played in our lives generationally until it's our time, until we've been done wrong. And then all of a sudden now protest is the manifest way to get the point across.
Yeah, and there's value in trying to normalize protests. You were talking about Italy. I've taken students to Greece a number of times, and it's amazing how many times we're going somewhere and then a protest breaks out. We're like, oh, a change of plans. But in Greece, it's a very normal thing. And my students often say, like, oh, geez, shouldn't there be some structure to this? And the Greeks are like, no, we're just protesting now. And I don't know. That always struck me as valuable to normalize that practice much more so.
And we used to be respectful of other protest lines, so you wouldn't cross the line, they would say. Especially in Europe, they were like, well, if the transit workers, and that happened to me, the transit workers went on a strike, and all of a sudden I was on a bus that just stopped in the middle of the night, So then the cab drivers said they weren't moving, and other people. So, people respect the lines. And the ballet was shut down because the ballet people, the dancers were on protest, speaking up on the side of the transit workers. So here it seems to be, and I like to use this word, drapetomania. Drapetomania. Drapeto mania. Now, what is drapetomania? Drapetomania is a word that was coined in the 1850s during slavery, and it was this disparaging thing, this mental illness for people who escaped slavery. They were seen as mentally ill, that they would give up slave heaven to escape. So if you think about if one would go all the way to create a mental illness for somebody who wanted to escape bondage, you can see how there's always this negativity, about protest. And so you're a communist, you're anti-patriotic,
right.
you're ne'er-do-well, you're just a miscontent or discontent. You're this. There's always something negative, and that's why we have this bad relationship with protests, because it's this idea that you're doing something bad and wrong and anti-social. And for drapetomania, if you ever think like, oh, they're going to say something bad about me, they said the enslaved person who ran away from bondage was mentally ill.
Wow, that's really extraordinary.
And so, yes, but then you think about if they would go to that means to disparage someone who wanted freedom from bondage, you can see how they would throw these terms around and just say, oh, these illegal protests. Today, they refer to illegal protests. Now, there's no definition. The Trump administration's been asked, what is an illegal protest? Oh, one that doesn't fall in line with what I want.
Right,
Basically,
right.
People scaling like roaches up the Capitol, breaking in, doing horrible things. Those people aren't protests. I don't even know if he considered them protests. At one point he said they were tourists. So
or heroes, right? He would talk about them as heroes.
Yes. And so I was like, maybe some other neighborhoods need some heroism like that, if they believe that's normal. But those people who were standing up for George Floyd's murder and saying we have to stop this form of policing, those people who are doing the protesting today, those people are seen as illegal protests. So illegal, what does that mean? Criminal. And once again, that's the disparaging of people. And one by one, and in my book as well, very quickly, I look at unions again because Chicago played, as you know, such a major role in union organizing. And those people who are protesting for unions, once again, were seen as people who were foreigners coming here to cause problems. And they were disparaged in many ways. People lost their lives to form unions. And so when it comes down to it, people are brutalized sometimes just to form a union that we take for granted today. And that's the whole point. It's like there are so many ways to protest, but also you have to realize what was seen as something horrible is something we embrace today, and we don't even connect it to the protest that took place at the time.
That's a really important. It makes me think about how we tell our history, and a lot of our history books focus on presidents, wars, these big political moments. What do we lose when we don't center the stories we tell about our history on the voices of protest? What are we missing?
Well, think about book banning. We're changing our history to fit the people who are in positions of power who don't want to know that protests benefited us in this way. What kind of stories are we going to tell next year when it's the 250th anniversary? Are we going to look at the Declaration of Independence as a protest document and therefore protest is good? Or we're just going to make those people heroes and no one else who ever protested to give us the things that we have today? I mean, I think that when we change the history and try to switch it around to make it benefit only a very narrow view of those people in positions of power, we've done the whole country a disservice. We're in a relationship. Our patriotism is a relationship. We have to take the good, the bad, and the ugly of any relationship. And so we're in a relationship with our country. Can we look at the good parts and also see where the bad parts are, the parts that need improvement, and embrace all of it? I like to say it's like being in a relationship with a significant other, but you only like the good parts of that person. And that's it. So the country has to be, the history of the country is what it is. You didn't do it and I didn't do it. It is what it is. And we have to go ahead and embrace and learn from the history, or else we're going to be a part of repeating it, and thus the protest. And I look at the United States and America as two different entities, two parts of a dual personality, in which the United States is capitalist and about the money and about crushing the spirit of people, in America at the same time as embracing people. So we have this dualism about protest, that the United States gives you the reason to protest and America gives you the support for protest. And that's happening in the same country, and it's been like this from its founding.
We have to be honest with ourselves. You mentioned George Floyd. So after the murder of George Floyd, we saw some of the largest protests in U.S. history. How do you place those demonstrations as demonstrations in the longer tradition of American protest that you look at? What do we see there?
What we see is that George Floyd gave us really a roadmap, a modern 21st century roadmap for how protests can be effective. They start off, as we see with the protests today, people angry and emoting. And then you start to see the different protests that are sporadic start to come together and build momentum. After that build of momentum, you start to find the commonality. Some people are protesting policing. Other people are protesting the lack of support for these types of cases against police officers. And these people start to come together, and as they meld together, you see the movement forward, and they come up with strategies and tactics, and becomes now something that's not disjointed but has a clear vision. And from George Floyd, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you've got changes in police policies. You have national legislation like the Emmett Till Act that was passed on lynching. You have things that happen, but at the same time, you have pushback, because there's another vision for the country, and they're going to push for their side. But you did gain some things, but we've forgotten what we've gained. So what we see actually is laid out in the George Floyd protests of how protests usually operate, that people forget what they've gained through the protest, and then they say, oh, then protests don't work. But you just, and you see this arc. And now you're beginning to see the arc here, where you're going to have leaders rise up from the different protests that are taking place and learn what works and what their message is. George Floyd's message, I can't breathe, said so much. We have no clear message right now. And so once the messaging gets clarified, the tactics and the leaders will start to rise up. And those people who are in these positions, and I love intellectuals, but if you're not an intellectual with a backbone to fight, please move over and share power with those people who do want to do battle here.
Yes.
Because we need warriors right now. And thinkers are great, and thinkers and warriors together, that's what you had in Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, this is such a great point. As an intellectual who hangs around a lot of other intellectuals, sometimes we're not the activists we need to be, but I think this moment demands some activism out of the intellectuals, right? I think that's such an important point to say. You can't just talk about it. You got to put the ideas into practice themselves. Okay. You were talking about overlapping movements, right? That there are different movements, whether it's civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, that they overlap. What did you find out about how each of these influenced each other over time? Do you see patterns?
Oh, definitely. I mean, someone that just is so amazing is Powhatan. The Powhatan, Chief Powhatan, was there when the English arrived. And you see diplomacy being used. You see pushback being used. You see them saying, okay, then how did we negotiate a peace? All these things. And then finally, it's like, well, if you're going to be violent against me, I'm going to be violent against you. So you have these overlapping things that take place as far as mechanisms for protest, so that the labor movement, as I said before, laid a foundation upon which the civil rights movement, modern one from the 1900s, could be built. The military background of many of those people of African descent who fought in World War I and World War II was very useful for organizing, as well as, you have A. Philip Randolph, who organized, and he taught organizing skills. You had the overlap of Mahatma Gandhi and nonviolent movement that informed Byron Rustin, who then informed Dr. Martin Luther King, and you began to see that overlap of those different types of ways. During the anti-Vietnam War movement, the college students did teach-ins. And so then teach-ins took on this movement, and then people started doing teach-ins around climate change. And you see how that was able to not just inform people, but when they had to go out to do their discussion. So protest wasn't just in the street. It was also informing people. And that's the other part I think that's missing. It's not just the protesting that we're doing today. I applaud all the protesters who have been doing any form of protesting right now against this regime. And I call it regime because they call themselves dictators, so dictator has regime. So
right.
I'm just referring to how they have described themselves. But we also have to have protesters who give a message to those people who are not in the protest. I think that got missed. That's something that's very important. Martin Luther King was amazing at communication. He knew there had to be a message to people outside to influence and persuade them to support movements. Those people outside are not going to be in the streets. They're not going to protest, but they're very important to the momentum. They have to be persuaded that something important is going on here. And I'll give an example. I was at a book talk I did on this book tour in Dallas, and I had two women who were white women, older, and they said, we are conservative Christians and supporters of Donald Trump. But we're here at your book talk because we want to better understand. That's who you're looking for. You're looking for people who are not so far to the side that they're in a cult. You want people who they want to understand, why are you protesting? What are the issues? So the message then has to be clear for them, so that they can, when the time comes, and it will, that they have to have their voices be heard in those doors, and those where we can't go in those doors, they will be in there as ambassadors for your cause.
And I think that can be empowering for people too, right? One of the things I know when I talk to people is they're looking for community. They're looking for outlets to come together. And when you go to indivisible protests or whatever they might be, they feel like they have a sense of community. And suddenly it's a lot easier to go to another protest. And suddenly it becomes normal behavior to do that. It's really extraordinary.
It is, but, as you mentioned Indivisible, and you mentioned other groups, and there could be the NAACP or whatever the groups may be, they have to now start talking to each other because these silos are not working. And so if we're going to empower people who are members of these different groups, members of the teachers associations, members of these groups around here, then they're going to have to understand that we're not going to all agree. Those protesters who are protesting around Gaza, that's their main focus. People who are protesting around DEI, other people who are protesting immigration, everybody's going to have their number one primary issue they're protesting. But there are common issues that might be number two or number three. on the list. If you find that commonality can connect with those people who are not in any protest, but they believe children should be protected. So when you're talking about children being deported, they can understand that. That's not something they would have protested about in immigration, but they will protest about the abuse of children being sent on ships or in planes or wherever they may be to another country. They will see that the protection of children is important to them. So you have to find those issues that are across the board. And right now, whether or not you're Harvard, Columbia, the unions, or, people of African descent, we're going to get picked off if we don't come together with some commonality around how we should be protesting, what we should be protesting, and what the vision, our vision of the future is. Because without vision, the people perish. And you have to have a vision, not just protest against something, but what are you protesting for? What's your vision where the country should go? The other side has a vision. They want patriarchy and billionaires. What do we want? And I say community power, because this is about, and you see in my book, A Protest History of the United States, that this is about 2045, because by 2045, this country is going to be majority people of color. And so what you see with Project 2025 was a way in which you could create an apartheid state, and you have some South Afrikaners in there, the way to create an apartheid state. And so this whole idea that we want to preserve stratify this country. That's what we're dealing with. And no one's talking about that because we're not having communication across silos.
This is such an important point. Gloria, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation and how much I've learned from you. So we got to let you go, but I want to thank you for taking some time to be with us and our listeners today. We've been talking with Gloria Browne-Marshall, who's a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, also a civil rights attorney and playwright. Thank you so much, Gloria. This was really, really engaging for me.
Thank you, and power to the people.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this.
Have you ever wondered why we picked the name Total Dentistry or what it stands for? This is Dr. Anna Pellick from Total Dentistry in Streamwood and Palatine. So what is Total Dentistry? T is for our team, highly trained to achieve your dental goals. O is for one-stop shop, because we can serve all your family needs in one location. T is for our advanced digital technology, which allows us to deliver your dental needs with accuracy and speed, like one-day crowns or implants. A is accommodating. Open 6 days a week from 7 to 7, our staff is here to assist you by phone, email, text, or in person. L is for loyalty, because without you, we have no future. Our growth is a direct result of you. So we take great pride in the words, "Nice job," and honor treating your friends and family. So call us at 847-358-2477 or visit TotalDentistry.org. Total Dentistry, a general dental practice like no other.
You've still got it, but your immune system weakens as you age, making it hard to fight the flu, pneumococcal pneumonia, RSV, and COVID-19. Ask your doctor or pharmacist which vaccines you need. Sponsored by Pfizer.
AP News, I'm Ben Thomas. Groups from across the political spectrum are blasting the Justice Department for considering a ban on transgender people owning guns. Sagar Magani has the story.
The condemnation came fast from gun rights groups and LGBTQ advocates. Federal officials have said a transgender shooter was responsible for a deadly shooting in Minneapolis last month. A person familiar with the matter says discussions about banning transgender gun rights are in the early stages. Still, the mere fact they're happening sparked fury after the administration's targeted transgender people from the military to sports. The NRA and other gun rights advocates say they will fight any proposal that would impose a blanket gun ban on any segment of the population. Sagar Magani, Washington.
If federal judges blocked the Trump administration from ending temporary legal protections, granting more than 1 million Haitians and Venezuelans the right to live and work in the U.S. The judge ruling that decision was arbitrary and capricious. Meantime, U.S. immigration agents detained some 475 people in a raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
A majority of Korean nationals from the 475.
Homeland Security Special Agent in Charge, Stephen Schrank.
This operation underscores our commitment to protecting jobs for Georgians and Americans.
The Labor Department reports U.S. employers added just 22,000 jobs last month, while the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3%. June and July's figures were also revised downward, leaving the U.S. economy creating fewer than 75,000 jobs a month so far this year. Stocks wobbled on the news, uncertain whether the job market slowed just enough to get the Fed to cut interest rates or whether a downturn's on the way. The S&P fell 0.3%, the Dow 0.5%, the Nasdaq less than 0.1%. This is AP News. Investigators have been searching for the cause of the streetcar crash in Lisbon that killed 16.
Portugal's Attorney General's office said 8 victims have been identified so far. 5 Portuguese, 2 South Koreans, and a Swiss person. There's also a high possibility, based on recovered documents, that the victims also included 2 Canadians, 1 American, 1 German, and 1 Ukrainian. 3 are still unidentified. Meanwhile, more than 100 relatives, colleagues, and supporters gathered at a Lisbon church to mourn the deaths. A colleague of the victims, Jose Freire, told the Associated Press he had known one of them for more than 30 years.
Muito difícil, como digo.
He says, it's very tough. One of the victims was relatively close to me. He didn't work in my area. He worked in a different area, but we worked together and we were very close. Officials added that 21 people were injured in the crash, 5 of them seriously. I'm Haya Panjwani.
There's more news at apnews.com. I'm Ben Thomas. Thanks for listening.
This is 8:20 a.m. WCPT Willow Springs and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Partly cloudy skies tonight with a low temperature of 51 and west winds at 15 to 30. Saturday, sunshine with a high temperature of 67 degrees and west winds at 10 to 20 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine and a high of 68. Monday, plenty of sun with a high of 74. Tuesday, partly sunny and a high temperature around 79. Wednesday, sunny with a high of 78. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 66.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Before we get to our next guest, let me just remind everybody that Monday on Live, Local, and Progressive, Mary Morton will be here for Joan, and she'll be talking to Carol Sharp, who's president and CEO of the Night Ministry, Ann Bossum, author of White Lies, How the South Lost the Civil War and Rewrote History, and Tracy Bain, co-founder and owner of Windy City Times, and Susie Schultz, writer, editor, and strategist. And then Joan will return on Tuesday. I'm so excited to be joined by our next guest, Barbara McQuade. Barbara is a professor from practice at Michigan Law. She served as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, appointed by President Barack Obama. She was the first woman to serve in that position. Our listeners will no doubt recognize Barb from her work as a legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. She's also the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation Is Sabotaging America. Welcome back to the show, Barb.
Well, thanks very much. I'm so glad to be with you.
Oh, absolutely. So, okay, I'm excited to have you here today because I've been spending a lot of time trying to assess how well the courts are responding to the rather extraordinary challenges that the Trump administration is presenting. You know, we're watching a president who actively, openly, and intentionally challenges any and all checks on his power. But it strikes me that in order to answer that question, we probably need to acknowledge what appears to be a growing divide between the federal district courts, which have largely been ruling against Trump, and the Supreme Court, which has largely sided with the president. I'm curious about your sense of this. How well are the courts responding, and is it accurate to say that we're seeing different responses at the federal level versus the Supreme Court level?
Yeah, really interesting. I think that I guess, how would I assess? I think the lower courts are doing a pretty good job. No doubt President Trump is working to test the limits of his power as the chief executive. So we've seen him do things like, change the definition of birthright citizenship, impose tariffs, even though the Constitution contemplates that the tax power belongs to Congress. All of these things, and mostly we have seen lower courts kind of rein him in. But you're right that the Supreme Court has, in many instances, ruled in his favor. They seem to be much more receptive to this once fringe theory known as the unitary executive theory. And, the Supreme Court has a slightly different role from lower courts. Lower courts are supposed to just follow the law, whereas the Supreme Court often decides cases where there is no clear answer and makes new law by deciding cases that are in the gaps. And this idea of the unitary executive theory is that all of the executive power resides in the president, and everybody who works for the executive branch essentially works for him. And so when it comes to things like firing people who are members of independent agencies, inspectors general, members of the NLRB, the Supreme Court has kind of gone along with that. One big test I think that awaits is how they view the Federal Reserve Board.
Yes.
They've in the past kind of said that's different. I don't know if they really think it's different or they're just afraid of what happens if the president gets his hands on interest rates. But they have distinguished that one just a little bit by saying that the Federal Reserve is a quasi-private institution, an outgrowth of the First National Bank, and therefore is not solely within the province of the president. So I think that's just something to watch. I don't think that they're in the bag for Trump or necessarily ruling in his favor, but I do think anything that comes under this unitary executive theory is something they're receptive to, and I also think they're pretty receptive to his powers as the chief executive and as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces.
Ooh, I want to get into all of that. Before we do, as a sort of nuts and bolts question, can you explain to our listeners the difference between these district courts, circuit court, and ultimately the Supreme Court? Because we're again, you said we're seeing different reactions here. What do we need to know about these different levels and how they're supposed to work?
Yeah, great question. So district courts are all over the country. They are federal courts in every district. They're in Chicago, you're in the Northern District of Illinois, and there are all kinds of trial court judges appointed by presidents of both parties, and they decide cases in the first instance. So if somebody decides to sue the Trump administration, they would go to their local federal district court, wherever that is around the country, and file a lawsuit. There are a few cases that must be filed in Washington, D.C. by definition, but many of them are just filed where the harms occur. So we've seen immigration cases filed in Washington, in Texas, Louisiana, Maryland, New Jersey, all over the place. When a court decides, the next place they will appeal their decision is to the local circuit court of appeals. So the country is divided into regions. So there in Chicago, you are living in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. They kind of work their way across the country. In Detroit, I live in the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. And so they're kind of grouped by a small cluster of states, and they will hear the appeals from those lower court district courts, and they'll decide if they think the court made an error in their legal ruling. And all parties are entitled to an appeal as of right in those circuit courts of appeals. The final layer, the top layer, is the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a court of discretionary jurisdiction, so you don't necessarily have a right to appeal your case to the Supreme Court. So if you don't like the outcome in the Court of Appeals, you can ask the Supreme Court to review your case, but they only take up about 80 cases a year. That's their capacity, and actually that number has been shrinking a bit in recent years. But they take cases where there is an open question of law, maybe a gap in the law, maybe a novel question. They call it a question of first impression. Sometimes they want to resolve a circuit split, so it might be that the 7th Circuit decided in favor of a Trump executive order and the 6th Circuit decided against it. To resolve that circuit split, the Supreme Court would take that matter up. Otherwise, it lets leave alone a lot of decisions by the circuit courts of appeals, and that'll be the last decision on that matter. So where the action really is in the Supreme Court is when there hasn't been an answer to a particular legal question ever before. And that is, I think we're seeing a lot of activity there only because the Trump administration has taken so many novel positions on legal issues. A lot of these executive orders have never been done before in an effort to expand executive power. And so I think that's why we're seeing a lot of cases come up even on its emergency docket. That's where if you're on death row, you might ask for sort of a last reprieve from the Supreme Court. We've seen a lot of cases where the Trump administration has asked for relief on the emergency docket. It's sometimes known as the shadow docket.
The shadow docket, yes.
Because it's all done kind of quickly, kind of slapdash without a lot of briefing. The decisions are usually just a couple of paragraphs, although those are usually for preliminary rulings. So what we've seen is courts enter emergency orders to block, maybe the deportation of immigrants or the change in birthright citizenship. And then rather than let that leave while the case proceeds through its ordinary course, we've seen the Trump administration go to the Supreme Court for emergency relief. And in many of those cases on that interim decision, we have seen the Supreme Court decide in Trump's favor. But that's not the last word, because what we'll next see is trials, factual findings by these lower courts,
Sure.
and then they will eventually work their way up to the Supreme Court. So it may be a year or more before we get the final word on some of these very aggressive executive orders. I imagine, some may stand, but I don't think that this court is in the bag for Trump. But I do think they share this unitary executive, expansive theory of executive power.
You mentioned the shadow docket, and it does seem like it's getting a lot of use by the court. Is that because, as you suggested, that Trump is just bringing so many cases, or is it a fair critique to say the court should be more transparent and rely on the shadow docket less? What's your read of what's going on there?
I'd say both things are true. So because of this phenomenon that we've seen, some people have said, poor Donald Trump, he's been subjected to so many temporary restraining orders. Well, that's, he's kind of asking for it, right? If you are going to challenge the separation of powers by, imposing tariffs, even though that's ordinarily the province of Congress, you probably should expect some temporary restraining orders. So I think because we're getting more of those, we are seeing the Trump administration go to the court on its emergency docket. So I think that's responsible for some of it. But I also think the court is to blame for some of it. And I do use the word blame because I think that while it's important for the court to have an emergency docket for true emergencies, like someone is on death row and unless you act now, they will be executed, I think they've been granting review of some of these emergency petitions when there's not really an emergency.
Sure.
Like, is it really an emergency that Trump doesn't get his favored brand new definition of birthright citizenship?
Right.
Just for listeners who haven't followed this carefully, when he, one of his first executive orders was to say that even though the Constitution under the 14th Amendment grants birthright citizenship, he was going to change that definition, with the stroke of a pen by an executive order. I think it strikes most of us as likely to fail.
Yeah.
And so the court said, no, we're blocking this. We're entering a temporary restraining order, and then we'll have a trial. It'll last, the whole case, all the litigation will probably take a year. But in the meantime, we're just going to preserve the status quo so nobody gets deported under Trump's brand new definition of what is birthright citizenship. What he says is, this is an emergency. I need my definition. Everybody drop whatever you're doing. And so I fault the court a little bit for agreeing to hear all of these cases on the shadow docket, when I think what they could and should and have said in the past is, wait your turn. Like, we'll get to it, but we're going to see it in its ordinary course. We're going to require full briefing. We're going to have oral argument, and then we'll issue a thoughtful, lengthy, reasoned opinion, not one of these little 2-paragraph jobs where people don't really know what's happening. So I think it's both. I think it's the Trump administration is sparking this, and I think the court is to blame for taking the bait.
That's really interesting to think about that way. So you mentioned the birthright citizen executive order. I'm curious your reactions to this one, because there's a lot of really important legal questions that the court has not weighed in. And even Donald Trump raises some novel and important questions. But this one seems like a slam dunk, right? If you are an originalist or you are a textualist, the language seems so clear to me. Do you think the court is even going to entertain this? Or how are you reacting to the fact that this is likely going to be decided by the court? Is there a chance that this is overturned? What are you reading?
Ordinarily I'd say there's just no chance that the Supreme Court changes the definition of birthright citizenship. I think that if we want to change it, we can, but it requires a constitutional amendment. I've been a little surprised by some of the decisions of this court, however. The Dobbs decision was one that certainly surprised me, and the Trump presidential immunity decision was one that surprised me. So they may surprise me again, but this one is just so locked in. What the 14th Amendment says is that anyone born in the United States or subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is a U.S. citizen. The language that they are playing around with is this subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And they say you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, essentially, if one of your parents is undocumented or both of your parents are undocumented. And the reason that is so flawed is a couple things. One is the Supreme Court decided in the late 1800s that a person whose parents were not born in the United States, who himself was born in the United States and had left, nonetheless retained his citizenship because he was born here, full stop. We have also seen some interpretation as what is meant by that phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. It was intended to exclude the children of diplomats or invading forces. So if an invading army comes into the country and they set up some sort of colony and somebody is born, you don't get to be a U.S. citizen if you did that. They're trying to liken unlawful immigration with an invasion, which, it's just not the same thing. And here's where the logic really falls apart. Undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, then they get the same kind of immunity that diplomats get. They can't be charged with a crime. They can't be hailed into court, all those things. And so that just can't be right. So I think ultimately this is going to fail. Why then and I think Trump has some very smart lawyers writing these things. Why then would they even write this thing? Well, I think they know that it will be in legal limbo for a couple of years while it works its way through the courts. And in the meantime, people may be reluctant to come to the United States and have a baby, hoping that it will the child will become a United States citizen. So creating chaos, creating uncertainty, making people's citizenship uncertain, I think, is part of the equation. I think it's, deterrence by cruelty, deterrence by chaos. But chaos is no way to run a country because it leaves people in a state of uncertainty, and not just, people who might benefit from the law, but, people in hospitals. At the oral argument, it came up, like, what do they put on the birth certificate when a baby is born? Do they have to find out what the citizenship of their parents are, or whether they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Like, how's that going to work? So
right.
I think ultimately this change is going to fail, but I think in the meantime, the legal uncertainty probably is what the Trump administration considers to be a win.
They win by even ultimately losing.
Yes.
I want to come back to this growing or emerging divide between the lower courts and the Supreme Court, because the data on this is sort of pretty fascinating to me, and I'm curious your reaction to it. So there's a political scientist at Stanford, Adam Bonica, who he was looking at this summer, and he found that the federal district courts have ruled against the administration 94% of the time. However, the Supreme Court has flipped that outcome, siding with the administration 93.7% of the time. At that point, 15 of the 6. So when I look at that feels, I'm guessing, Barb, that's not normal, is it, to have such a divide between how the lower courts versus how the Supreme Court is ruling?
Yeah, I'm just going to speculate here because I don't know what's driving that, of course. But I think one of the things that could be driving it is the fact that Trump is taking action that is so far beyond the bounds of established law.
Yeah.
And so when you're a district court and even a circuit court, you have to follow the law that's listed in statutes and prior court decisions. You can't overrule the Supreme Court. You can't say what the law should be. You can only say what the law is. You have to follow the law. The Supreme Court gets to write on a slightly blanker slate. And so only they can say, this is lawful. They can expand a president's powers if they believe that that's what the Constitution requires, whereas the lower courts are kind of bound by what has come before. So that could explain why we're seeing that difference in outcomes. There could also be a little bit of judge shopping going on, I suppose.
Sure.
If you are trying to get challenge an executive order, you might go to a district where you're likely to get a favorable ruling. And then when you go to the Supreme Court, you got that 6-3 conservative majority, 3 of whom were appointed by Trump himself. So I suppose that could account for some of it as well.
What do you think about, the idea of partisanship on the court? We're all human beings, right? And so judges are, have partisanship and bias just like everybody else. But we're hearing more and more of that critique. I've always felt that in some ways there's always a little bit of partisanship built into the process, right? If you want to be on the Supreme Court, you have to be a political actor. But then once you get to the court, you're sort of implementing that judicial philosophy. Do you think that's at play, or does it feel like we're maybe seeing more partisanship at the Supreme Court these days? What's your sense of that?
Yeah. What I tell my law students is that judges, I think, by and large, try very hard to apply the law objectively. But of course, all of us come to every case with a worldview. And there are some people who have a more conservative worldview or a more progressive worldview than others. And as you say, when you got the appointment, it was probably because there was something about your background or your experience that demonstrated to the party that appointed you that you shared their worldview. So we have, people with worldviews that are going to be reflected in their decisions. I don't think that's politics so much as it is philosophy of how the world works and life experience. If you have been somebody who has worked as a public defender and then you become a judge, you probably understand how difficult it is for people to get a fair shake in the world when they are living in poverty. Conversely, if you are somebody who has served at the highest levels of the Justice Department, maybe you have a more law and order view of the world. I think that's just natural. I will say, I think most of the justices, I'll include among them, Justices, Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, I think they have a worldview, but I think that they are deciding cases as best they can. I'm not sure I would feel comfortable saying the same about Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas. Man, those two, I swear you could have a Supreme Court decision, do the Yankees play in New York? And you'd have 7 of the justices say, the Yankees play in New York. And if somehow that you have, Alito and Thomas dissenting, like what?
Yes.
It really feels like those two have really bought into the culture wars.
Yes.
That that America's soul is up for grabs by whichever party comes out on top. And I don't like to say that or to think that, but the way they've ruled in all these cases, these absolute slam dunks that have, where it's a 7-2 decision, and you've even got 4 of the conservative justices, ruling in favor of something, ruling against it. You'll see these 2 dissenting. It's just, how can you possibly think that? So, I don't want to say they're in the bag, but maybe their worldview is just so far to the right that they disagree with even the other conservative justices on the court.
No, they are the interesting study at this point, because it does feel like there's the 7 of them are trying to call balls and strikes from their own perspective, and then those 2 feel like they're doing something else. So, well, speaking of the justices, I'm curious to get your assessment of the writing of the opinions of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her dissenting opinions have become must-read for many following the court. She's not pulling punches about her concern for the direction of the court. What are you seeing, and what's your reaction to some of those opinions?
Yeah, super interesting. One of the most recent ones that I found interesting was she's saying that the court is operating under the rules of Calvin Ball.
Oh, I love this.
You see that one? Referring to Calvin and Hobbes?
Yeah.
And the only rule of Calvin Ball is that there are no rules.
Right.
And Calvin always wins. And she said that the Trump administration seems, the court seems to be playing by the same rules as Calvin Ball. So it's interesting because she's not just, criticizing the Trump administration or dissenting in view, but she's really taking them to task for siding with Trump on some of these issues. And in particular, I believe it was her opinion where they invalidated the ability of judges to issue nationwide or universal injunctions. She talked about at the very moment when the rule of law is in most need of being defended, this court is really dropping the ball and shirking its responsibility to do that. No court ever before has said a lower court is unable to issue a nationwide injunction. You choose this moment to say this? Like, there are all kinds of Biden orders, like about immunization and forgiveness of student loans. Like, you could have said back then there's no such thing as a nationwide injunction. You approve those. Yeah. But now, when we've had a president who's, threatening the rule of law, now you say there's no such thing. So I thought, it's interesting because it's a different tone to kind of go after your fellow justices, not just to say I dissent, but to say, you guys are blowing it. And so that's new. But I welcome her voice. I share her views. And I think sometimes you need to say things strongly to be heard above the noise. If you instead just say, I respectfully disagree with my distinguished colleagues, I don't think you get noticed the way you do it when you make a reference to Calvin Ball, right? Something in pop culture that's a different way of expressing it. So I think I credit her. Sotomayor and Kagan have also been quite vocal in their dissents. Instead of saying I respectfully dissent, saying things like, with sadness I dissent, with concern for our democracy I dissent. So I think all of them are really trying to voice their view that this isn't just, it's a close legal question and we decide one way or the other. This is really a threat to democracy and the rule of law, and we need to sound the alarms.
Barb, this has been so valuable. I always learn so much, and I become less partisan. You always talk sense into me. I just want to thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. We've been talking with Barbara McQuade, who is professor from practice at Michigan Law and a former U.S. attorney. Thanks so much, Barb, for your time. I always appreciate and learn from your insights.
Well, thanks for having me. And may I mention that I'll be at Printers Row Literary Festival tomorrow in Chicago at 4 o'clock. So come out and see me if you're in town.
Absolutely. Great idea. Thanks so much for sharing that. So, all right, we've got to get going. Thanks again, Barb. We're going to be right back after a short break.
Fall is here and colder nights are on the way. Is your home ready to stay warm and energy efficient? Green Attic is Chicagoland's trusted expert in attic insulation, spray foam, crawl space encapsulation, and mold remediation, solutions that seal in comfort and cut down on high heating bills. If your upstairs feels drafty or your heating system is constantly running, your attic may be to blame. Their team helps balance temperatures and reduce energy waste from the top down. They also offer full-service roofing through Green Attic Roofing, covering asphalt shingles, flat roofs, premium roofing solutions, and solar panels. Every project comes with a 10-year labor warranty and instant online estimates to help homeowners replace aging roofs before winter sets in. With over 15 years of experience and over 1,000 five-star reviews, Green Attic delivers real comfort season after season. Visit greenattic.com for a free installation consultation or go to greenatticroofing.com for an instant roofing estimate today.
Still struggling with gas, bloat, constipation, nausea, or diarrhea? Have you tried eliminating foods but felt no change? It's time to call the tummy whisperer, Renee Barish, at Digestive Health Solutions. Renee uses targeted testing to reveal exactly what's happening in your gut. Gut bacteria plays a key role in all your body functions, from cardiovascular regulation to brain function. When the gut is imbalanced, you may experience symptoms that extend beyond the gut, such as anxiety, skin issues, poor sleep, or increased risk for disease. Digestive Health Solution uses advanced testing to identify harmful microbes and evaluate the overall balance of the gut ecosystem. Get insights into your health, digestion, and how your microbiome affects all aspects of your body. Stop suffering. Call Renee now at 847-207-2034 or visit thetummywhisperer.com. That number is 847-207-2034. Let's get you feeling better. The Tummy Whisperer.
I'm Jessica Ettinger, CNBC. A down day on Wall Street today. Investors fearing that things really could be going wrong with the economy after the weak August jobs report, although they're hoping the Fed will cut interest rates at its meeting at the end of the month. The Dow down 220 points, 0.5%. JP Morgan shares led it lower. They were down more than 3%. The S&P 500 index was down 20 points. The NASDAQ was down 7 points. The S&P and the NASDAQ were in the green for the week. NVIDIA shares fell almost 3% today. Companies whose shares hit fresh all-time highs today include Google parent Alphabet, Expedia, Ralph Lauren, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. Gold closed at its 30th record high of the year today. Another weak jobs report, only 22,000 new jobs created last month. Jessica Ettinger, CNBC.
Hear the CNBC business updates each weekday at 9:30, 12:30, and 4:30. Now your WCPT 820 Chicago weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Partly cloudy skies tonight with a low temperature of 51 and west winds at 15 to 30. Saturday, sunshine with a high temperature of 67 degrees and west winds at 10 to 20 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine and a high of 68. Monday, plenty of sun with a high of 74. Tuesday, partly sunny and a high temperature around 79. Wednesday, sunny with a high of 78. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 68.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Before we get to our next guest, we've got another contest. 2 contests, 1 show. It's pretty amazing. So this month, Northlight Theaters presents, quote, the First Lady of Television at Skokie's North Shore Center for the Performing Arts. The play tells the story of Gertrude Berg, creator and star of America's first family sitcom, The Goldbergs. It opens tonight and plays through October 5th. Tickets are available at northshorecenter.org. Right now, I've got a pair of tickets to give away to the Saturday, September 13th performance. Not only will you have a chance to see the play, but our very own Joan Esposito will be there for a pre-show meet and greet. That's a great opportunity. Now, if you're the second caller at 773-763-9278, the tickets are yours. That's Saturday, September 13th at 7:30 p.m. And again, that number, 773-763-9278. Second caller gets the tickets. And let me remind you of the rules. Contests running on WCPT are open to listeners 18 or older and residents of the greater Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana area. 1 entry per person, 1 winner per household. Void where prohibited by law. Listeners may only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. Our complete rules are available on the website at WCPT.com by clicking on the contest lab. All right, I am so excited to end the show with my favorite colleague, Dr. Suzanne Chod. Many of you know Suzanne. She's a professor of political science at North Central College, specializes in American political institutions, parties, campaigns, elections. She also teaches courses focused on women in American politics. Can you think of a more perfect guest for these times? You will no doubt recognize Suzanne from her regular appearances on WCPT, but also WGN, CBS, The Ninth, and a multitude of other media outlets. Welcome back, Suzanne. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're my best hype man. Thanks, Bill. I love it. Appreciate it.
That's the fun part about being on radio. Okay. All right. So you and I, we were talking today and over the last couple days, and you've been telling me that you're grappling with this question of whether we're in a constitutional crisis, but you're thinking about it a little differently than some other people. Walk me through what's going through your head here.
Yeah, it's, I listening to the show today, all of your guests and callers, and then especially with Barb just being on, it seems like this is like a serendipitous anchor conversation, I think, in some ways, based on everything we talked about. So, and I know we in political science have talked about this a lot. Y'all have covered it here in WCPT and other places about whether we're in a constitutional crisis. That phrase gets thrown around a lot, has been getting thrown around a lot since January 20th at 12:01 p.m. Right. So I, you and I have lots of conversations about this, and you've been convinced longer than I have that we are in a constitutional crisis. And we sort of playfully fought about this at the beginning of the semester, at the beginning of last spring semester. And so, and then I kind of took another turn where I was like, well, maybe Bill's right. We continue to see, which I'm sure you love to hear. We continue to see the president and those in his administration lock Congress out, buck subpoenas, when the Supreme Court, although not really, but when lower courts have told him to stop doing things. Barb was talking about this with injunctions and so forth no longer being allowed. We've seen all of these things happen. I'm like, okay, well, maybe the Constitution doesn't really cover all of these things. And I second-guessed myself in thinking we're not there yet. And then I revisited a piece by Jennifer Nicole Victor, a political scientist, she wrote in May, where she has a very straightforward definition of what constitutes a constitutional crisis. And she basically says that a constitutional crisis only occurs if something happens where the Constitution does not provide enough guidance on how to move forward. And then I was right back in my mind again about, like, then we're not in a constitutional crisis. Because her argument, which I agree with, is that we're in a political crisis where there are members of government who are actively engaging in not following the Constitution and allowing for unlawful behavior as a means to keep power. And so I'm sort of back in this, like, we're in a political crisis, not a constitutional crisis. But then we talked more today, and I'm even more confused than I was this morning. So I'll stop. You jump in.
Okay, well, let's think through this, because I love a good sort of conceptual categorization of things.
Yeah.
How would you understand a political crisis? Let's start there, because we kind of understand the broad concept of a constitutional crisis. Like, we have these rules and they're supposed to govern us. And boy, it feels like we're outside of that. How would you understand and explain a political crisis?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said, that it's not about the guidance that the Constitution fails to provide. It's that the Constitution provides the legal guidance on how to resolve a particular conflict. And because of the party that's in control that would have to enact or exact that guidance, that they have decided not to, then it's an active choice that's being made to not solve conflict. And the word politics really inherently is about conflict, that not everyone can get what they want. People have to compromise and come to some sort of agreement to move forward. And so inherently politics is conflictual, but we typically use the Constitution and other laws to overcome the conflict. But instead, this is a political crisis because they are letting the conflict persist in order to stay in power. So if we were to argue this is a constitutional crisis, we'd have to say, okay, it's time to start playing by these rules. But what you're saying is, no, that's not where we're at. It's a political crisis. Right. There are certain actors who are engaging in poor behavior that are causing this problem. And so, and the answer to who's behaving poorly, is it Donald Trump, the Republican Party? How do you what's going on there? So yes, and yes, okay, and yes, right. So it's Trump, it's Donald Trump, and Barb talked about the unitary executive theory, and that's incredibly important, right? That the president is the executive branch. Bill Barr, said this in a memo when he was trying to become Attorney General, right? That the president is the executive branch, and the executive branch is in charge of implementing laws, writing guidance for and implementing laws. And so the president thinks that he can do whatever he wants because his authority, although he uses the word power, is totally unchecked. And those around him, like Stephen Miller, are saying that's exactly right. The president's authority should not be questioned. He thinks he's not violating the law or the Constitution, but those around him who are smarter than him know that he is. But they've created this legal theory to suggest that that's not the case. So let me throw an example. Go ahead. Go, you continue. Finish up. Yeah. Well, I was going to say I fault him for doing this, but to be honest, part of what I've moved on from is faulting him and now just being like rageful at Congress. Y'all, I mean, Bill, I love Congress. Everyone hates Congress. I love Congress. My heart is in Congress. It's my favorite institution, which is why I'm so betrayed by them. Yeah. Because the Republican Party has made a decision and a choice to say Article 1, Section 8, that lays out all their authorities. It's like they ripped it up and said, no, thank you. We're just not going to do any of these things. And the 10th Amendment. Yeah. Go ahead. No. 10th Amendment. Keep going. I was going to say the 10th Amendment that says that the things that are not reserved to the federal government are automatically reserved to the states. I fault the Republican governors who are rolling over and saying, states' rights, that's our party. Just kidding. We will just roll over and let the president and the Republican Party at the federal level do whatever they want. How unique is that? And what I mean by that is, how unique is it for Congress to willingly give up its power, right? I mean, you talk a lot about institutions, and usually the number one goal of an institution is to retain its power. And so we're seeing governors give up that power. But to your point, I think the more blatant example has to be Congress, where they are saying, like, well, the Constitution says we have the power to tax. No, Donald Trump, you go ahead and do all the tariffs. We're not going to reassert our authority, right? I mean, that strikes me as, is that unique in U.S. history? Yes, 100%. And so much of this is tied into Donald Trump's demagoguery, right? So the fact that he is this demagogue leader who has created this relationship with the voters. And I use this word not loosely because other political scientists have likened it. It's a cult-like, please hear the like part, cult-like following in that whatever he says, whatever he does, he's the only truth teller, right? He's the only one that can be trusted, and there's sort of a blind following. And so because his co-partisans in Congress, their electoral fortunes are tied to whether they support him or not. And not just in Congress, but also at the state level. I mean, we're seeing this at city council levels, school board levels, that a litmus test of whether or not you're a good Republican is whether or not you blindly follow the president. And so because of that unique part of it, that electoral fortunes being tied to the president, that is why Congress is rolling over, because these members want to get reelected. That's their proximate goal. And until there's this more en masse turnaround, they're just going to keep delegitimizing their own power and their own authority in order to get reelected, to literally sit at the Capitol and do nothing.
Because the fear of upsetting the great leader is so great that you say, I just got to get reelected. That's more important than my institution, right? It's a really extraordinary moment when you have, I mean, I think we could talk about the Supreme Court doing a little bit of that as well, maybe in a less dramatic fashion, but also catering to the president and saying, sure, you know, we'll entertain the unitary executive theory. Joe Biden, he went way too far when he tried to forgive some debt, but you want to destroy the education department? You want to get rid of foreign aid? Of course, right? We see, I think there's multiple institutions that are ceding to the president. And yeah, it is really extraordinary to watch. Okay, another question for you. Today or yesterday or today, Trump was coming out and talking about that he wants to change the Department of Defense to the Department of War. And there were some saying, well, he can't really do that. Would that be an act of Congress? But he came out and basically, to your point, said, like, I don't care, I'm doing it. What do we need to know about all of that?
Yeah, no, this is exactly right. So only Congress can change the name. He can't unilaterally do this, although just like the Gulf of America, right? Like he called it that, but that's like not what it's called. But I think, and you would know this better than anyone, that it's not unimportant that that's what he wants to change the name to. Right, he wants to change it back to the Department of War and have Pete Hegseth be the Secretary of War. But what he said actually is, I think, the most important when asked about this. He said, well, Congress will go along with it. That's exactly what he said. Congress will go along with it. So it's like they're on this, it's like Mike Johnson in particular has like a choke chain on. It's a very short leash that he has these members on. And because the margin of the majority is so small, that he's really good at putting his thumb on the scale, because it has shown that when you go against the great leader, as you said, you either retire like Tom Tillis or you get primaried and you lose.
Really interesting. We need to take a quick break here. We will be back. And Suzanne, when we come back, I want to start thinking about how we respond to this political crisis. We'll be right back after just a minute on WCPT.
This is Tony Moret. I'm an estate planning lawyer who drafts living trusts and wills. Since the election, I've been hearing from my clients, many of them fellow WCPT listeners. And we all wonder, how did this happen and what can we do? The how is, of course, very complicated. My thoughts as regard to what we can do is simple but important. We need to take extra care of those we love. Having an estate plan using either a living trust or will can provide comfort in uncertain times like these. When the progressive values we hold dear are under attack, I feel we must make sure that our personal lives are secure and then work out from there. I've been drafting estate plans for my clients for over 30 years, and I will use all of that experience to help you. Please call me at 847-996-0496. My website is moreylawoffice.com. That's Morey spelled M-O-R-E-E. Again, the phone is 847-996-0496. There is no cost or obligation for our initial discussion. I look forward to speaking with you.
Oh, could this vintage store be any cuter? Right? And the best part? They accept Discover. Accept Discover? In a little place like this? I don't think so, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah, huh? Discover's accepted where I like to shop. Come on, baby, get with the times.
Right, so we shouldn't get the parachute pants?
These are making a comeback. I think.
Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Based on the February 2025 Nielsen report.
Are you a parent of a 2 to 8-year-old? Listen closely for an exciting offer, then head to abcmouse.com/radio to learn more. By now, you've probably heard of ABC Mouse.
ABC Mouse is like a little one-on-one teacher. It has helped her so much.
We're offering a promo at abcmouse.com/radio to try it for free for a month, then $14.99 per month until canceled. Go to abcmouse.com/radio to see this offer. That's abcmouse.com/radio. Actual ABC Mouse users compensated for their testimonials, sponsored by Age of Learning.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck. Because that's how we roll.
Welcome back to WCPT. Let me remind everybody about the Credo mobile phone and text line, and that listeners now get 25% off 2 years at Credo Mobile with the code WCPT25. Credo Mobile, a progressive phone company that is better for all people and the planet. Visit credomobile.com. All right, we are chatting with Dr. Suzanne Chod, professor of political science, and she was explaining before the break about the distinction between a constitutional crisis and a political crisis. All right, Suzanne, I want to think through how should we respond to a political crisis? What does that look like? What do we need to be thinking about? Do we need to fix the Constitution, or where should we be focusing?
Yeah, that's something we talked about again this morning, and I've been thinking about for most of the day. Is that with a political crisis, typically, I don't say typically these pass, but usually they're sort of quote solved by election. Yeah. Right. We see we talk about in political science kind of the mood. Right. And yes. So James Simpson talks about the mood. Right. And so typically what happens is like a pendulum. The mood goes one direction, left or right, typically swings back one direction, left or right. And so, it swung left when Obama was elected for the 8 years. It has swung back right and further right even, maybe than we thought the pendulum could handle. And so typically when we end up with a sort of this type of political crisis, there's a tipping point where the mood starts to shift and then elections kind of sort of, quote, take care of it, right, where we can kind of move out of a place where one party, the party in the majority, even though it represents a minority of interest, stops kind of, tyrannizing the people in the government, so to speak. I don't know how long that's going to take for an election, let's say, to roll us out of this. I think that when Joe Biden won in 2020, there was a thought that, the MAGA movement, sort of what Trump did in 2016 to 2020 and all of that, it wasn't behind us, but there was a reckoning. Yeah. And then he was elected and won the popular vote in 2024, and that wasn't a reckoning. It was we ended up with a doubling down. And so I would say that to answer the second part of your question is that fixing the Constitution doesn't fix that. Yeah. And so in order to fix it, quote, we have to start with why the political crisis exists. If we fix the Constitution, it doesn't really fix the problem.
Well, and this speaks to, so this morning we were talking a little bit about my optimistic vision, which I opened the show with. I said, hey, there's still room for optimism. And you poo-pooed that. Yeah. You were way more skeptical. And I think that speaks to the point that you were just making to say hey, one election is not going to fix that. And I would say I totally agree with you. My thought on winning a midterm election is it stops the bleeding, right? And it creates space for maybe some optimism. But I think you remain pretty skeptical of being able to right the ship quickly. Is that a fair assessment? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. We were sort of joking. I'll tell the listeners we were joking today that this is we disagree on very little, and this is one where we were disagreeing with one another. Yeah. You were like, I think it's fine, and I'm like, it's not fine. It's definitely not fine.
Well, we should clarify. I think it's much, much worse. I think we're in a constitutional crisis. I think we've slipped into authoritarianism, but I still retain some optimism, whereas you don't think it's quite as bad, but are more pessimistic, which is really sort of fascinating.
I know we've flipped it all over, but no, you're right. I think I feel like this is at a point where we are at every level. I mentioned this earlier, down to school board elections, that polarization and calcification have seeped into every single part of our lives. Everything is political to begin with, but now everything is calcified, right? Vaccines and sports. And I heard there's a push now potentially to ban transgender people from owning weapons. I mean, like, everything has become calcified all the way up and down. And so it's one thing when things are polarized but not extreme. But because we're polarized, extreme, calcified, up and down, left, right, center, and everywhere, one election is not going to undo the depth of this. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen in 7 elections. I'm just saying that, yes, I think you're right, that at the midterm election, if Democrats can take control of at least one of the chambers, and if the Democrats can make some headway in some of the state legislatures or in governor's offices, it definitely stops the bleeding. But, like, the Supreme Court's not going to stop the bleeding.
Right.
And we've seen that. And the administration has no intention of slowing down, and in some ways couldn't care less if the Democrats control one of the chambers of Congress, because they're just going to run roughshod with executive orders.
Yeah, absolutely. They're indifferent. I mean, I think Trump is worried about some potential investigations, but otherwise he doesn't need Republican control of the Congress to do what he's doing through executive orders. All right, let me ask you this. So do you feel the current version of the Democratic Party is up to this challenge? Are they well positioned, or does the party itself need to shift and adapt to these evolving times?
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats are terrible at winning elections. You and I have talked about this,
Yes.
right? They suck at winning elections. And there's a whole host of reasons why. And I think, one of the reasons that is under discussed is that the Democratic Party's voter base and the elected representatives in the party across the country are so heterogeneous. There's so much diversity, regional diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, gender diversity, ideological diversity. I mean, there's so many factions in the Democratic Party because of that diversity. And so it's been difficult to find a unifying message for the party as the party represents a more diverse electorate, which is pluralism. And I'm actually not mad about that necessarily. But it makes it really challenging to bring like a national voice together and to say, this is what all of us who have a D next to our name and are running for office stand for. And it can't just be we don't stand for Trump or we stand against Trump. It has to be we all stand for A, B, C, and D. And they have not figured that out yet, but that is what they have to do.
One of the things, and we were talking about this earlier today as well, is that Gavin Newsom has gotten more attention, right? His stock has gone up. And I think a lot of people didn't have a particularly high opinion of him. But what he's done is he's mocked Trump, and he has come across as strong. So you were talking about the struggles that the Democratic Party is having to find a message that reaches to these diverse audiences. Is, in the short term, a good-looking white guy who projects strength, does that get you to where you need to be, or how do you assess Newsom's sort of rising stock?
Yeah, I think there's two things, and we talked about this morning as well. And we have talked about, and I've heard you mention in other places that the sort of stooping to Trump's tactics makes it harder for Trump to say that those tactics aren't ridiculous, or others who look at it say, like, those tactics aren't ridiculous. But the thing that is so hard about those types of tactics, and also, actions the Republican Party has taken, like, mid-cycle gerrymandering, and now the Democrats are going to do it, though, in a different way, is that the Democratic Party for so long has said, we're the party that's going to actually, adhere to laws and adhere to the Constitution, and we're gonna hold the line on democracy and not stoop to the level of not just mocking and all the things Newsom's doing now, but also we're not going to do the things that are illegal and unconstitutional. And so now they're going to turn around and say, we're going to do all of those things. But are we in such a political crisis that they have no other choice? And you and I went back and forth a little bit on that today, because I think that's probably right. I think that the party is in that place. But when you spend so much time saying, I'll never do that, and then you start doing that, that's like whiplash for the voters who have said, but wait, what happened to our party? We said we would never do that.
Yeah, and even, not just Newsom, but the Eric Holder saying that the Democrats have to also play the gerrymandering game. And then Barack Obama coming out and saying, yep, the moment is so dire that we have to do this. So there's a running away from the way in which the Democrats have governed. And it is, you're right, it causes the head to spin a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when Michelle Obama was famous for saying, like, when they go low, we go high, and she said that at the DNC, I think it was in 2012, maybe 2016. I'm so sorry, I can't remember. And now you see her at the 2024 convention, and it's like a different person. Like, if Michelle Obama is like, we gonna go low now, then it's like, okay, maybe the party has decided it's time to go low now. And I get it, because they need to start winning elections. In order to, like, really stop the bleeding, not just with a Band-Aid, but with, like, some stitches. But I have to say, like, I also don't know in mass if the National Democratic Party is going to get on board with that strategy. It's one-offs right now. But I think, to your point, if Barack Obama, who's arguably still the most important voice in the Democratic Party, is like, let's do it, then I think that sends some signals to the National Party.
This is so interesting. We got it. We're up against the end of the show here. But as always, thank you so much, Suzanne, for coming in and helping us think through these unprecedented times. We've been chatting with Dr. Suzanne Chod, who's a professor of political science at North Central College. Thanks so much, Suzanne.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good weekend.
Yes, you too. And I am out of here. Wonderful opportunity to be here again. Thank you so much, Joan and Andy, for the opportunity. I always enjoy it. Stay well over the weekend. And again, I remind you, there's some space for optimism in this political world. All right, I will see you next time.
At Straight Talk, we get it. You say no a lot.
Mom, can I get a tarantula?
No.
Coffee?
No. So we're giving you more reasons to say yes, like a free 5G phone with real unlimited data with select plan activation.
Can I use the free phone?
Yes. See? Doesn't it feel good to say yes to more?
Absolutely. Face tattoo? Absolutely not.
Available at straighttalk.com and Walmart. Taxes and fees apply. In-store activation of Gold Unlimited plan or higher required. For network management practices, visit straighttalk.com.
Witness a slice of TV history with the First Lady of Television, now on stage at Northlight Theater. It's 1950, and Gertrude Berg is the pioneering creator and star of The Goldbergs, America's first family sitcom. When a co-star becomes a target of McCarthyism, Gertrude is faced with taking a stand or damaging her career in this ever-relevant new play by James Sherman, based on a true story. The First Lady of Television runs at Northlight Theater through October 5th. Get your tickets today at northlight.org.
You've still got it. Your immune system weakens as you age, making it hard to fight the flu, pneumococcal pneumonia, RSV, and COVID-19. Ask your doctor or pharmacist which vaccines you need. Sponsored by Pfizer.
EP News, I'm Ben Thomas. President Trump's aiming to rebrand the Defense Department through an executive order. Saka Makani explains.
From 1789 to 1947, there was the Department of War.
We won the First World War. We won the Second World War. We won everything before that and in between, and then we decided to go woke and we changed the name to Department of Defense. So we're going Department of War.
The president says he thought long and hard about it.
I think it's a much more appropriate name, especially in light of where the world is right now.
Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth was alongside in the Oval Office, saying after the name was changed following World War II.
We haven't won a major war since.
And with the change,
we're going to go on offense, not just on defense.
Congress has the sole power to rename federal departments. Two Trump backers on Capitol Hill have proposed legislation changing the name. Even without that,
we're going with it.
Sagar Meghani, Washington.
And President Trump says next year's G20 summit will be held at his golf club in Miami.
There's no money in it. I just want it to go well. And it's going to be each country will have its own building. I think it'll be really a beautiful thing. And